Chapter 2051. In the main hall of the Qinghuan Palace, Zhang Yan was concentrating. Ever since he fought with the existence's avatar, he had faintly glimpsed many of the mysteries of the Tao. This was not the same as when everyone else merely collided with the avatar. Instead, he had directly fought with the avatar, so he could see it very clearly. Although he could only see an extremely small part of it for the true body of the existence, it was precisely because of the difference in their cultivation levels that he felt he had gained a lot. Not only that, but he also vaguely saw some things and had a rough idea of the existence's origins. And if it was really as he thought, the difficulty of dealing with this person was much higher than he had imagined, and it was close to impossible. However, there was a trace of change in all things, so he would definitely be able to find a way. He could not see it now because his cultivation was not deep enough, and his cultivation level was not high enough. If he could enter the second stage, it would not be difficult for him to see more. He cultivated here while his avatar presided over the battle in the hall. Unknowingly, a long time had passed. Ever since the incarnation of the Whaley appeared, everyone had been constantly entering and exiting the void to fight against that existence. However, the creation fragment was very difficult to find. Ever since they had obtained it that time, they had not seen another one. As for the land of creation, there were no clues. However, thinking about it, it made sense. How could such a place be so easily found? Under the constant interference of the crowd, the magic power rippling out from that existence was constantly being disintegrated. It even gradually formed a kind of encirclement. Even though this was only on the surface, and once that existence came back to its senses, it could destroy all of this with a flip of its hand. But at least it was different from before, when it could only avoid and not dare to stand out to face the enemy. Taoist Xinchang said, "If there are people of the same Tao outside, they will definitely be able to see what we are doing. Even if I don't go looking for them, they can come looking for me." Everyone nodded in agreement. Over the past few days, they had been repeatedly fighting against that existence. If they had any comrades outside, they would definitely have seen it. In comparison, it would be much easier for the other party to take the initiative to look for them than for them to look for others. However, until now, there had been no movement. They believed that one reason was that they had yet to display the strength to contend against that existence, and could only be regarded as a skirmish that could not determine the overall situation. Therefore, they had all been hiding and not making a move. If they could stabilize the situation and persevere under that existence's heavy pressure, then perhaps they would come to contact. If they were to be overturned after that, then there was naturally no need for them to visit. Another reason was that he wanted to contact them, but he didn't have the ability to do so. He was afraid that if he made any movements, he would be discovered by that existence and expose himself. Based on this point of view, even if someone came to visit, it would be a long time in the future. Thus, after everyone discussed with Zhang Yan, they decided not to think about these things for now and focused on dealing with the matter at hand. However, the changes in heaven's secrets were often unexpected. Just as they stopped thinking about this matter, someone came to find them. In the silence, Taoist Zheng Yuan's Whaley incarnation was fighting against that existence's magic power. At this moment, he suddenly felt something and turned his head to look. He saw a beam of light suddenly shining over, as if a bright flame had suddenly lit up in the night. His heart trembled, but he immediately relaxed a little. This was because the aura coming over at this moment was completely different from that of that existence. He asked, "Which fellow Taoist is here?" The light slowly faded, and a slim woman with a thin gauze covering her body and a silk draped around her arms appeared. Only her beautiful eyebrows and eyes could be seen. She bowed to him and said, "Greetings, fellow Taoist. Chen Shu greets you." Taoist Zheng Yuan looked at her for a moment, then returned the bow and asked, "Fellow Taoist, are you the incarnation of a treasure spirit?" Hearing his question, the woman seemed a little displeased. She frowned and said, "Could it be that fellow Taoist is still obsessed with your origin at this time?" Taoist Zheng Yuan shook his head and said, "I don't mean that. I have a good friend who is also a treasure spirit of fate. I'm just a little curious about your origin, so I'm just asking." The woman felt relieved. She pondered for a moment and said, I don't have any origin. As you can see, I just obtained the legacy of the essence of fate and became a spirit of fate. That's how I became a treasure spirit. It's just that some people wanted to catch me in the past, so I hid in secret. Later, I disappeared from those people's auras, so I thought I was safe. Who would have thought that I would meet that treasure spirit of fate again? I've been hiding ever since. However, my place is not safe. Since I saw you fighting against that treasure spirit, it's obvious that there's a place behind him, so I came to seek shelter. Speaking up to this point, she added, if fellow Taoist doesn't want to, I'll leave now and never disturb you again. Taoist Zhang Yuan pondered for a moment and said, forgive me for asking, but where did you hide before? The woman revealed a troubled expression. Seeing her like this, Taoist Zhang Yuan said in a deep voice, it seems that I misspoke. The woman hurriedly said, it's not that I don't want to tell you, but if I speak rashly, I'm afraid that treasure spirit will detect me. I see that you have a lot of fellow Taoists here. Can I pay them a visit? If it's a safe place, I'll tell you all about it. Taoist Zhang Yuan nodded. Everyone could naturally hear his conversation. After communicating with Zhang Yan through the divine will for a moment, he received the latter's permission and said, if that's the case, please come with me, fellow Taoist. With a single thought, he headed toward a certain location. Chen Shu also followed the aura he had deliberately left behind and also descended. Taoist Zhang Yuan led the way and said, fellow Taoist, please come this way. Chen Shu followed behind him, and with a turn, they arrived in front of a magnificent palace. This wasn't Bushu heaven, but the land of fortune behind the auspicious origin chaotic domain. This palace was Sun-Chasing Palace. Zhang Yan naturally wouldn't easily let people with unknown backgrounds enter Bushu heaven, especially since there were many strange forces in Bushu heaven. If they were activated by others, it would only add to the trouble. If he was the only one guarding Bushu heaven, he wouldn't be afraid. However, there were many peers here, so he had to be careful. He clearly knew that it was best not to give others a chance to make mistakes when there was no binding agreement. Otherwise, even if they didn't have such thoughts before, they might have other ideas because of this. Sun-Chasing Palace was left behind by the great underworld patriarch, and he had long since taken control of this place. If outsiders entered this place, it would be difficult for them to leave without his permission. This was the best way to prevent accidents from happening. At this moment, everyone's incarnations arrived and stood on the high platform in the palace. After a short while, Taoist Zhang Yuan walked in with Chen Shu. Chen Shu looked at the seats, and at the same time, she found that the peers who were fighting against that existence in the void were all here. Zhang Yan was sitting on the main seat, so he was clearly the person in charge. She composed herself, came up to salute, and said, greetings, fellow Taoists. Zhang Yan could see that this woman was only a manifestation of a spiritual fire, and she was supported by some creation essence qi. She didn't have much power, and she was even weaker than the consciousness avatars of ordinary soul refinement cultivators. If it weren't for the fact that they were fighting against that existence in the void, which weakened the fluctuations of magic power, she would have been shattered by a simple impact. If there were no special circumstances, it could only be said that she was lucky to be able to come here now. He flicked his finger from the seat, and a wave of qi rushed down. Chen Shu felt her body sink, and then a wave of creation whaley surged up her body, protecting her. Her body, which was about to dissipate, immediately stabilized, and she couldn't help but feel pleasantly surprised. This time, she had tried her best to come to the void, and this body couldn't be maintained for a long time. This was because of her limited ability, and also because she was afraid of being discovered by that existence. She didn't know when she would dissipate. Now that she had this help, there was no more hidden danger, so she bowed again and said, "Thank you, fellow Taoist, for helping me." Zhang Yan nodded slightly, and said, "Fellow Taoist Chen Shu, why are you looking for us?" Chen Shu felt slightly embarrassed, and said, "I'm looking for a place to seek shelter. Seeing that everyone dared to fight against that existence, I guessed that there must be a hiding place, so I came to ask for help." When she said this, her expression became more serious. If I can get shelter, I'm also willing to work together with fellow Taoists. Taoist Xinchang said, then where did fellow Taoist hide before? Chen Shu said, I also have a place of creation essence to hide in, and that's why it wasn't taken away by that existence. Taoist Xinchang was stunned, and said, since fellow Taoist has this place, why did you seek shelter from us? Everyone was also puzzled. If it was said that Chen Shu came to join forces, they could accept it, but she clearly had a place of creation behind her, and yet she came to seek shelter. This was a little strange. Chen Shu sighed, and said, the place of creation essence that I seek shelter in has many peculiarities. After staying inside for a period of time, I'll be driven out, and I don't know why. Although I'm currently inside, I don't know when I'll be driven out again. When that time comes, I'm afraid that existence will notice, so I have no choice but to seek shelter from fellow Taoists. Zhang Yan thought for a while, and said, this matter can't be decided with just a word. Fellow Taoist, you can go to the side hall and wait. We need to discuss this. Chen Shu was also tactful, and she bowed before leaving with the array spirit boy to the side hall. Zhang Yan looked at everyone present, and said, what do you think? Taoist Zhang Yuan said, this person is the same as fellow Taoist Xinchang. He's also an innate treasure spirit, and not a human cultivator. If he's taken away, I'm afraid that existence's strength will increase. Taoist Qing Xing said, we still need to consider. As usual, Taoist Quan Dao and Taoist Quan Dao had no objection. As for Taoist Xinchang, he didn't say anything to avoid arousing suspicion because he was also an innate treasure spirit. Zhang Yan turned to look at the yawning, sleepy-faced boy Xinchang, and asked with a smile, fellow Taoist, what do you think about this matter? Boy Xinchang shook his face vigorously, and said, not good, not good. As for what exactly was not good, he didn't say it clearly, but in short, it was not good. Zhang Yan, on the other hand, looked pensive, and finally raised his head, and said, I already know about this matter, and I'll personally go and investigate later. Everyone, focus on the enemy, and don't be distracted. Chapter 2052. After Zhang Yan said this, most of the people left, except for Taoist Zhang Yuan. After taking a few steps, he thought for a moment and stopped. He cupped his hands and asked tentatively, fellow Taoist, do you think there's something wrong? He was the one who brought Chen Shu here, so he felt that he had to ask about it. Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, although it's reasonable for Chen Shu to come here, there are always some coincidences. He would not easily believe Chen Shu's casual words, especially at this time. He should be extra careful. He still needed to verify the truth. Taoist Zhang Yuan pondered for a moment and said, fellow Taoist, do you think Chen Shu's origin is suspicious? Or this person and that person? Zhang Yan smiled and waved his hand. Not yet. No one knows what that person will do in the future. Now, it won't show any mercy to us. Besides, if it really wants to deal with us, it can just destroy its doppelganger. It really doesn't need to do this. That person devoured everything and naturally stood on the opposite side of all cultivators. If it saw a treasure spirit of fortune like Chen Shu, it would be better to directly devour it to increase its strength. To put it bluntly, they wanted to affirm their usefulness, but they didn't need to think too highly of themselves. Although they had caused some disturbance to that person, it was far from the point where it would deliberately divert its attention to deal with them. There was no need for it to beat around the bush. Taoist Zhang Yuan also heard it. He pondered for a moment and felt that it was the same. Usually, only when facing opponents with similar strength would they consider using such a roundabout method. With their current strength, they were not worthy of such treatment from that immortal being. If this matter only involved Chen Shu and had nothing to do with that person, it would not be difficult for Zhang Yan to deal with it. He didn't need to worry about it anymore. He immediately cupped his hands and said, then I'll take my leave. Zhang Yan nodded and said, fellow Taoist, you may leave. After Zhang Yuan left, he also began to ponder. Judging from the little fortune essence qi that Chen Shu carried, it was indeed from a place of fortune. However, the essence qi was very weak, and it was difficult to see anything useful from it. Since there really was a land of fortune, he had to find a way to figure out the situation there. If there was no master there and Chen Shu was chased out of there was no need to talk about her life or death. If the location of that place was exposed because of this, it would be given to that person as food for no reason. If his strength suddenly increased at this time, it would lead to a series of bad consequences. For example, if the Taoist was defeated in a short period of time, that existence would most likely focus its attention on Bushutian. Even if they could avoid it, all the plans they had previously laid out would certainly be unable to be maintained, and they would be forced into a passive position. After weighing in his mind, he said to Ling Xiaozi, "Go and invite that fellow Taoist." After Chen Shu went to the side hall, she sat there and waited for news. However, her expression was extremely anxious. As a treasure spirit, she was not able to maintain her composure like the cultivators who had cultivated their way up. She was afraid that these fellow Taoists would not agree to her request for protection. In that case, she could only wait for death in her original territory. At the same time, she was also worried that her true body would be chased out of the land of fortune during this period of time. At that time, it would be useless to say anything. After waiting in this torment for a long time, Ling Xiaozi came in front of her and said, "Grand Elder, the hall master invites you to speak with him." Chen Shu stood up and said, "I will go with you." She understood that this matter was about to come to an end, so she followed the child to the main hall. Seeing that only Zhang Yan was there, she went up to greet him. Zhang Yan raised his large sleeve and made a gesture of invitation. He said, "Fellow Taoist, please take a seat. I still have a few questions to ask." Chen Shu saw that his attitude was polite, and her heart calmed down a little. She thanked him and sat down at the side. She asked slightly carefully, "What does fellow Taoist want to ask?" Zhang Yan smiled slightly and said, "Fellow Taoist, do not have any misgivings. Fellow Taoist's true body is still in that land of fortune. If you want to seek protection in our domain, I need to understand the situation there and then find a suitable method." Chen Shu was pleasantly surprised. "Your side is willing to seek protection from me?" Zhang Yan's tone softened. He said, "If fellow Taoist is willing to come to my place, we will naturally not refuse. Right now, that being is wreaking havoc in Suji, and we need more Taoists to fight with us. However, I also hope that fellow Taoist can explain in detail what you know and not speak nonsense. Even if there was a problem with her body, as long as she did not enter Bu Su Tian after being accepted, then there would be no problems. She could be placed in this palace, or simply moved to Kuei Yin Palace. That would eliminate all hidden dangers to the greatest extent. If she was truly asking for help, under the current situation, it was already good enough that she could seek protection. Presumably, she would not ask for more." When Chen Shu heard him say so, her heartstrings were slightly relaxed. She thought about it and said, "Speaking of that place, I do not know much. When I was in the domain, I was muddle-headed and did not know my own existence. It was as if I had no consciousness. Only when I sensed the arrival of danger would I become clear-headed and remember the original. This time, it was also because of that being's danger that I happened to see you outside, so I hurriedly sent out my avatar." Zhang Yan pondered for a while. It was not difficult to discern that what she said was not false. Moreover, he knew that as long as it was a treasure spirit of fortune, it would inevitably have some flaws, be it in terms of temperament or nature. However, it was understandable since it was originally a treasure of fortune. It was just that compared to cultivators with a human body, there was less training. Therefore, it was inevitable that they would encounter various obstacles and dangers on the path of cultivation, and no one knew when they would appear. Just like Taoist priest Chang, he had encountered trouble at the Jizhen Pass. If he had not resolved it afterward, no one knew what would have happened in the end. While he was blessed by the heavens, he was also easily envied by the heavens. He said, "The domain that fellow Taoist is in seems to be quite strange. In this case, I can only go and investigate personally and meet with fellow Taoist. Now, I hope fellow Taoist can tell I the location of the creation. Chen Shu asked, fellow Taoist, do you not need me to guide you there? Zhang Yan said, fellow Taoist, it is safer to stay here. After all, it is very likely that you will be discovered by that being. Moreover, with fellow Taoist here, if there are any changes in the future, we can also ask you at any time. Chen Shu thought about it and agreed. She pointed with her finger, and a wisp of qi activity wandered out. She said, fellow Taoist, I can go there with this. She hesitated for a moment and said with slight embarrassment, I just want to ask fellow Taoist to go there as soon as possible. Zhang Yan looked at her and said, I know. Fellow Taoist is afraid that your true body will be chased out of the place of creation. You don't have to be anxious, I will go there in a while. There was one more thing that he did not say. If Chen Shu had been chased out and discovered by that existence before he arrived there, then it would have been fate. Chen Shu's heart relaxed. She bowed and said with slight gratitude, then I'll leave it to fellow Taoist. Zhang Yan nodded and said, fellow Taoist can stay here for the night. Before there is an outcome, I hope that fellow Taoist will not move around as you please. Chen Shu hurriedly agreed. Right now, she had a favor to ask of someone, and she was only a clone. Of course, she would not act presumptuously. After Zhang Yan gave these instructions, he turned his consciousness back to his true body. Because the place he was going to was a place of creation, it was not appropriate to send the creation Weili clone there. If he was not careful, he might be discovered by that being. It was best to use the method of using a consciousness clone to enter the world. Of course, this was under the premise that it was a place without a master. However, if there really was a master there, it was actually a good thing. It meant that there was a chance that he could find an ally. Right now, he did not lack a place of creation. The one behind the clear chaotic domain had not been refined. Even if there was another one, it might not be able to protect it. With a thought, two large hands formed by spiritual light fell from the sky and unfolded the long scroll on the table. Immediately, the scene of the void appeared in front of him. He stared at it and tried to sense it according to the qi activity he had obtained from Chen Shu. However, the scroll was still empty. He did not look away and continued to watch. If he found this place so easily, it would have been discovered by that being long ago. After a long time, he faintly sensed something. First, there was a slight feeling, and then this feeling became stronger. He suddenly saw a place with endless light, but it was flickering, as if it could escape from his field of vision at any time. At this moment, he was able to clearly see that this really was a place of fortune. Especially the fact that the present world was practically indestructible, he was even more certain of this. Since he had found the place, he naturally would not sit still. If he delayed for too long, he might miss it. At that time, he would have to search again. Hence, with a thought, a mighty force incarnation appeared in the silence. When it sensed where the mighty force was, its mana surged over and was guided by Chenju's aura. After a series of collisions, a strand of aura had already entered. Zhang Yan's eyes flickered. Although it was an incarnation that entered, he could not confirm whether there was a master inside. Thus, he could not rule out the possibility that the other party had let him in on purpose. Since his original body was not in the void, he could only know what was going on inside when his consciousness incarnation came out. If he was lost inside, then he would sense it at the first moment, and then he would be able to respond. After the wisp of qi activity entered the place of creation, it instantly transformed into a consciousness incarnation. Zhang Yan's incarnation sensed it and found that everything around it was abnormally blurry and chaotic. It was completely different from the places of creation that had manifested in the various worlds in the past. He could only sense a few places clearly. Not only that, there was no fluctuation of Fa Li from his peers in the God refinement realm, which surprised him. From the looks of Chen Shu's incarnation, she did not pass the enlightenment stage. It was obvious that she could not restrain her Fa Li. Either her original body was no longer here, or there was a special method to conceal it. He thought about it and decided to first go to the few worlds that he could still sense to see if he could find any useful clues here. Chapter 2053. Zhang Yan sank into the domain and swept his gaze around. To his surprise, he discovered that this place looked no different from an ordinary world on the surface, but there were actually no humans here. All those who had attained the Tao were all otherworldly spirits. As the saying went, clear qi turns into humans, turbid qi gives birth to demons. Even if the spiritual vigor was weak or almost non-existent, as long as it was evolved by heaven and earth, the two would appear. Even if there was a difference, it was because of the different spiritual vigor. However, there was no one here, and only demons and beasts were left behind. It was absolutely impossible for such a situation to not have a powerful being behind the scenes to push things along. At this moment, in his senses, the past and future of this world were covered, and he could not see above the source. This was another proof that there was someone of the same generation here. He looked around again. In this world, there were 6 people with the strongest qi dynamic, and they should be the ones with the highest cultivation here. For this generation to be able to cultivate to such a high state, it would not be without a reason. They should more or less be related to this spirit refinement cultivator. They could be his disciples, so he could try to find them. So, with a change of heart, he came in front of one of them. It was a white-robed scholar. At this moment, he was drinking by himself in a pavilion. From time to time, he would pick up a scroll of Tao scripture and read a few times. When he suddenly saw Zhang Yan, he was stunned. Then, as if he remembered something, he looked excited and surprised. He quickly stood up, bowed respectfully and said, "Greetings, Grand Supreme." "Grand Supreme, are you here?" Because, as he said this, he seemed to have thought of something. He looked around guiltily and did not continue. When Zhang Yan saw that this person was able to identify his identity with a single glance, he knew that he had found the right person. He looked over and saw that there was a layer of incomplete concealment on the surface of this person. Although he couldn't see through it, he could tell that this person was extremely similar to the true spirit of a certain magic treasure. However, he didn't continue to look deeper. Instead, he withdrew his gaze and said, "What did you want to say just now?" The white-robed scholar seemed to be afraid of startling someone and asked carefully, "Grand Supreme, are you here because of that?" He pointed somewhere. "Because of that lamp?" Zhang Yan knew that the person he was talking about should be Qin Shu because the latter was the manifestation of the spiritual fire. However, to his slight surprise, Qin Shu was a mighty cultivator of the spirit refinement realm at any rate, yet this person's tone didn't have the slightest bit of respect towards her. Instead, his attitude seemed as if he was talking about a fellow cultivator. Logically, even if they were from opposing sides, people of lower states would not dare to disrespect the Almighty like this. Moreover, it seemed that this was not the case. He said, "I have indeed met her, and I am here at her invitation. Based on what you said, I heard that you have some relationship with her." The white-robed scholar felt the voice resounding in his mind and immediately felt much more at ease. At the same time, he became excited and hurriedly replied with his mind, "Of course there is. Because it is precisely because of our efforts that she is where she is today." Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows and said, "Oh? The person you speak of is a spirit refinement cultivator. How can you help her?" The white-robed scholar seemed to want to say something, but in the end, he could not say it. He stammered, "There is a reason behind this." Zhang Yan saw that he wanted to say something but did not dare to say it. He said, "Since you know this fellow Taoist, do you know where her true place of cultivation is? I will go and talk to her myself." The white-robed scholar's expression changed, and he said, "True place? What true place? I don't know." Zhang Yan's eyes flickered, and he had some guesses in his heart. He did not speak to this person anymore. His consciousness moved, and in the next moment, he had already appeared in another place. On a reef, a middle-aged man wearing clothes made of seaweed stood. His beard and hair dragged into the seawater below. Around him was a group of half-human, half-fish merman children, all of them gathered around him to listen to him preach. The middle-aged man noticed something at this moment. He turned around and saw Zhang Yan standing on the surface of the sea with his sleeves behind his back. His expression changed slightly, and he lowered his head in thought. He then waved the children away, stood up, and respectfully bowed to him. "This lowly one, Tang Lai, greets Grand Supreme." Zhang Yan said, "Your aura is similar to that person in the Peach Pavilion. Are you from the same sect?" Tang Lai made an "oh" sound and pretended to be relaxed. "The person Grand Supreme is talking about must be fellow Taoist Bai Zhuan. It must be him speaking incoherently again. He is just like that. All day long, he treats his imagination as truth, and then he forgets about it." As he said this, he bowed again. "If Grand Supreme needs to know anything, feel free to ask this lowly one. This lowly one will tell you everything." Zhang Yan looked at him indifferently and said, "No need. It's better for me to see for myself." At this moment, his incarnation appeared on more than 10 different places. The aura and magic power of the people there were very similar to that of the white-robed scholar and the middle-aged man in front of him. When he took in all of them, he discovered something different when he looked at them again. These people were originally one, but they were forcibly separated by a certain kind of Weili. Just now, when he looked at them together, it was like a broken thing had been reunited, and their original appearance was revealed. But at this point, he still felt that there were too many traces of carving on this person's body. What he saw here was not the final truth. He pondered for a moment. Although the past and the future were blocked, it was not impossible for him to forcibly look at them. Normally speaking, these lower realm cultivators wouldn't be able to find anything useful on them, so deity refinement cultivators wouldn't do this if they wanted to find some clues. Moreover, once they did this, it would alarm the people behind them. Not only would they be suspected of bullying the weak, they would also make enemies out of nothing. But the situation now was different. He could clearly feel that as long as he peeled off this layer of cover, he would be able to know the secret here. Only then could he truly come into contact with the person behind them. When he thought of this, he did not hesitate and immediately used his magic power to push aside the layers of fog. In just a moment, the background of this person was finally revealed before him. What reflected in his eyes was a flame that illuminated the world. It had no source, no root, and could not be seen. When the flame was bright, life would be born and the world would be bright. When the flame was dim, it would be silent and decline. It was clearly a treasure of creation. From the aura that was constantly being emitted by the flames, he also knew the name of this treasure. Sunset Beam. He was the spirit refinement cultivator here, the master of this world. He had always hidden himself in the depths of the land of creation, which was why Lu Ming had not been able to sense his location earlier. However, Lu Ming could also tell that something must have gone wrong during the process of cultivation. Sunset Beam was currently in a deep sleep and could be said to have let down his guard against the outside world. Even when Lu Ming entered this place, Sunset Beam did not sense him at all. As a cultivator who had passed the enlightenment stage, Zhang Yan's cultivation was higher than this person's, and he was also the master of the land of good fortune. Thus, when he saw this, he immediately understood what was wrong with this person. This Shi Liang was also trying to break through. Because he was a yin-yang fire, he was born with two sides. Thus, when he cultivated, he showed the nature of two sides. Whether it was Qin Shu, Bai Hao, Tang Lian, or the other 10 or so people, they were all born from his body. Every time he woke up, he would devour the treasure spirits that he had split off in order to complete himself. The next time he fell asleep, the treasure spirits would be born again, and the cycle would repeat itself. This was actually devouring itself. These treasure spirits were not only its resources, but also its creations. Speaking of which, this was another method of taking into account both the external and the external. It relied on the land of creation, and in the process of ceaselessly devouring it, it was actually comprehending the truths of the Grand Tao. When it finally comprehended itself, then it would be able to pass this test. However, it was very similar to the trouble that Taoist Xinchang had encountered in the enlightenment stage. Originally, every time he devoured the treasure spirits, their previous memories would be erased. However, perhaps it was because his cultivation was flawed. As time passed, the treasure spirits also noticed something. They were deeply afraid because once they gained their own consciousness, they naturally did not want to be destroyed. Once Sunset Beam's cultivation was complete, they would no longer exist, so they began to search for a way to escape. Unfortunately, after they split up, their power was also scattered. Moreover, they had already separated from the ball of fire, so they could not resist at all. However, there was still a way. They could not do it themselves, but they could try to find someone who could. Thus, every time Sunset Beam fell asleep, everyone would work together to send all their power into the fire to be nurtured. After a long time, another consciousness would be born, and it would become a single person. That person was Qinshu. Everyone placed their hopes on Qinshu, hoping that she would be able to find a solution. As long as she could escape from her original body, it would be possible for them to be freed as well. Qinshu had not been born for long, so she had no interest in talking to those lower realms. She also did not have the ability to see through the mist, so she did not know about these things. She had been chased out because she instinctively avoided danger. This was because once Sunset Beam woke up and discovered her, he would swallow her. When Sunset Beam fell asleep, she naturally treated his body as her original body. In reality, this was not completely wrong. This was because Sunset Beam had already lost the consciousness that he should have. Before he completed his cultivation, he would not stop this cycle, because they came from the same source. Originally, Qinshu would only discover her true situation after a long time. However, due to the threat of that existence, she was afraid that if she was chased out again, she would be swallowed. Thus, she made the move to ask for help. Zhang Yan relied on observing this person's foundation and his own deductions. At this moment, he had more or less restored the entire situation. He thought about it. He had returned this time to find Qinshu's original body and investigate the truth of this place. However, he did not expect the true situation to be like this. Sunset Beam's cultivation had actually gone awry. Forget about unraveling the truth, he could not even protect this land of creation. If this continued, this place would definitely be discovered by that existence, and it would be snatched away. Chapter 2054. Zhang Yan considered for a moment. Actually, he did not care who was the master. Whether it was Qinshu or Xiliang, they were all fine as long as they were willing to join forces with him to deal with that existence. As for matters like cultivation, that was their own business and had nothing to do with him. But in the current situation, he had no choice but to intervene. Otherwise, the only person who would benefit the most would be that existence in the silence. His current choice was either to help Xiliang solve this problem and help him pass the test of understanding the truth, or to find a way to support Qinshu so that she could completely replace this existence. He leaned towards the latter. He did not know what Xiliang's personality was, but he had seen Qinshu. She did not have a strong personality, and he could see that she did not have many pursuits. Most importantly, she had taken the initiative to ask for their help. Then, they would have a good reason to act, and they would be able to continue working together in the future. If it was Xiliang, if he knew that they originally had the chance to destroy him, unless he was an extremely open-minded person, he would definitely have a knot in his heart. Then, it would not be beneficial for them to work together in the future. However, it was extremely difficult to do this. One had to know that the one who controlled the main body was still Xiliang. Qinshu could at most be considered a subconsciousness that was derived from the main body. They were not equal. This could be seen from the fact that Qinshu had to actively escape when she was awake. If the two of them were to fight, unless Qinshu could obtain their help, she would not have any chance of winning. However, Zhang Yan only had a clone here now. No matter how thorough his plan was, he would not be able to push this matter forward unless his main body could come. But if the main body wanted to enter the silence, then he had to first pass through that existence. Even if he could successfully avoid that existence's obstruction and enter this land of creation, there was a high possibility that he would awaken the sleeping Xiliang. It would not be easy to not reveal any traces. But no matter how difficult it was, he had to think of a way to solve it. Zhang Yan's Qi activity clone turned and escaped from this world. Then, everything that he had seen was immediately known by the Weili clone. With a thought, he had returned to the main hall of Qinghuan Palace. He thought for a moment on his seat, then told Jingyu, "Take my talisman order and invite my fellow Taoists here." Jingyu accepted the order and left. Not long after, everyone came to the hall. They first greeted each other and then sat down. Zhang Yan said, "Just now, I sent a clone out to investigate the land of creation that fellow Taoist Qin Zhu mentioned." Taoist Zan Yuan asked, "What's the situation there?" Zhang Yan told everyone about what his incarnation had seen and said, "Now, I need to choose between Xiliang and Qinshu. Only then will I be able to protect the land of creation. If any of you have any suggestions, please let me know." When everyone heard this, they were surprised at first, but then they began to ponder. Taoist Xinchang pondered and said, "The most difficult thing about this place is that we can't easily reach the place of creation, so it's hard for us to interfere." Everyone nodded incessantly. This matter was difficult to traverse in the void. If their true bodies could arrive there silently, then it would be easy for them to do anything else. However, it just so happened that this point was firmly blocking their path. Taoist Qingxing said, "I think the best way is to tell Qinshu the whole story and send her back. Then, she can fight with Xiliang on her own. That way, I won't have to interfere and will be able to solve the problem perfectly. Even if Qinshu loses, it won't be a problem. Xiliang is alone there, so he must be afraid of that existence. If he doesn't rely on us, what can he do?" Zhang Yan had also thought of doing this. In fact, even if Xiliang allied with them, it wouldn't be a problem. But according to the current situation, without any external interference, Xiliang might not be able to wake up on his own. Even if Qinshu was swallowed, as long as the treasured embryos of spiritual fire were still there, the dozen or so treasured spirits would not give up fighting. They would definitely think of another way. Perhaps, they would try to give birth to another treasured spirit consciousness. The worst-case scenario was that before the victor of the battle between the two of them could be decided, that existence would discover this land of fortune. At that time, Xiliang, who was the master, would be powerless to defend it. Wouldn't that be giving up this place for nothing? They absolutely couldn't rely on luck in this matter. Compared to that existence, they were obviously weaker. If they were to give up on something that they could obtain, then it would be abandoning their own fortuitous encounter. So, they must obtain what they should obtain. Taoist Quan and Taoist Qingxing hadn't spoken until now. This time, after discussing with each other, Taoist Huang Fang cupped his hands and said, "Fellow Taoists, no matter what method we use, we think that the current situation is to stop Xiliang from waking up." When everyone heard this, they all deeply agreed. After listening to Zhang Yan's previous description, they already understood that this existence had actually fallen into a state of stagnation. Before he broke through, he would definitely not recover his original consciousness. Therefore, he wouldn't take the initiative to defend the place of creation. The most troublesome thing was that even if he woke up from his slumber, there would still be no difference. If he woke up and did not fall into a deep slumber, then even if they wanted to interfere, they wouldn't be able to do so unless they chose to fight head-on. Not to mention that they couldn't do it now, even if they could, it would go against their original intentions. Zhang Yan asked, "Fellow Taoists, do you have any ideas?" Taoist Huang Fang said, "We cultivate a heart-binding incantation. If we chant it, it can help our fellow Taoists cultivate. However, those who hear this incantation will fall into a deep meditative state. If there are no evil thoughts in them, they won't come out of the meditative state." In Kong continued, "This incantation doesn't need to be chanted by the real body. Now that we have an avatar of mana outside, we only need to send an avatar of consciousness inside, and we will be able to do this." Everyone asked them a few questions and agreed that this method was very good. The most amazing thing about this was that if there were evil thoughts against Xiliang, there was a certain possibility that he would wake up. However, the incantation would actually only benefit him and not harm him. As for the stage of understanding the truth, there was actually a problem with his foundation. This was not something that could be easily solved by a simple incantation. Therefore, they weren't afraid that Xiu Yang would benefit from this. At this moment, Ying Kong added, when our avatars go there, we can still keep an eye on it. If there are any strange movements, we can also report to you immediately. Zhang Yan immediately made a decision, there's no time to lose, I'll leave this matter to you too. He pointed his finger and 2 streams of qi flowed down, the 2 of you can use this to find the place. Daoist Huang Fang and Ying Kong immediately received it, bowed and said, we'll go now. The 2 of them retreated from the hall and turned their consciousness to the avatar of Wei Li that was in the silence. As the qi flowed, they could already sense the place. The qi that Zhang Yan gave them was many times stronger than Qin Shu's, so they didn't have to deliberately search for it. They followed it and immediately found the place. As their mana seeped in, the 2's consciousness avatars were already condensed in the land of fortune. At this place, they still followed Zhang Yan's guidance and sensed the spiritual fire that was everywhere. They didn't need to see Xiu Yang, they only needed to chant the incantation. As long as Xiu Yang felt that it was beneficial to them, they would be able to hear it. In order to prevent Xiu Yang from waking up after sensing the evil intentions, the 2 avatars' knowledge was limited. They only knew that they were really here to help Xiu Yang, so they wouldn't trigger the warning signs in Xiu Yang's heart. At this moment, the atmosphere in Bushutian's hall was slightly relaxed. It should be known that it wasn't that some things couldn't be solved, it was just that it was too urgent, so they couldn't come up with many solutions in a short period of time. If Daoist Huang Fang and Ying Kong handled this matter well, they would have time to think about it. Daoist Qing Shen calculated in his heart, then raised his head and said, actually, it's not impossible to go there directly, but we need a bait. Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, fellow Daoist, are you talking about Xian Che, Kenshin Xiao, and the others who are currently being suppressed in Bushutian? Daoist Qing Shen said, that's right. As long as we drive them out before we act, we will definitely attract that existence's pursuit. At that time, we can take advantage of the situation and sneak into that place. Zhang Yan's eyes flickered slightly. This method had a certain chance of success, but it was too radical. If there were other safe methods, he wouldn't want to do it. Xian Che and the others were currently being suppressed there, but it wasn't impossible to order them to fight against that existence in the future. Most importantly, that existence wasn't a puppet that listened to their instructions. It had its own judgment on who to attack. Not only would it not necessarily comply with their wishes, but it would also expose its location. Therefore, he didn't comment on this suggestion. Daoist Xinchang thought for a while and said, can I have a few words with fellow Daoist Qinshu later? Perhaps it can be of some help to her. He was also a creation treasure spirit, and he had confronted boy Xinchang for a long time. He believed that he had some understanding in this aspect. If he could understand more, he might be able to come up with some ideas. Zhang Yan smiled and said, of course. Seeing that no one had anything else to say, he dismissed them first. Before Daoist Zhang Yuan left, he said, fellow Daoist, I think that since fellow Daoist Luan Fang and Bing Kong have appeased her with spells, it's better to put this matter on hold. It won't be too late to deal with her when you are confident. Zhang Yan pondered for a while. Daoist Zhang Yuan meant that he could put this matter on hold for the time being. When he reached the second stage of his cultivation, he would be ready to lead everyone into the desolation and deal with this matter in passing. In the long run, this would indeed increase his chances of success. However, the heavenly mysteries changed very quickly, and he didn't know when he would succeed. If the outcome of the battle in the desolation had already been decided, it would be even more difficult to deal with this matter. He nodded slightly and said, thank you for your reminder, fellow Daoist. I will consider it carefully. Daoist Zhang Yuan cupped his hands and bowed before leaving. Zhang Yan stood motionless in the hall. He also had an idea, and that was to directly enter the land of creation without going through the desolation. This was possible. For example, the 4 chaotic domains passed down by the patriarch came from 4 different realms, but they were all interconnected. If he could open up a chaotic domain in the land of creation and leave it there, then find a way to connect it with the other 4 domains, he would be able to directly reach the land of creation. If he could do this, all the troubles he had to face would be solved smoothly. However, even if the patriarch could do it, he might not be able to do it as well. He thought that if he could borrow the patriarch's Whaley, it might not be impossible, so he might as well give it a try. But if he did this, he would probably have to use the 2 jade pendants left behind by Taoist Xian Che. Chapter 2055. Zhang Yan thought about it carefully. It wasn't difficult for him to use his consciousness clone to open up a chaotic domain in the land of fortune. The key was how to connect the chaotic domains. He still remembered that when he subdued Taoist Sky Reaching had said that the great underworld patriarch had seized the clear sync chaotic domain from someone else. The truth might not be like this, and there was no need for him to look into it. However, combined with the various signs here, he could infer that the 4 domains should have been connected after the patriarch occupied them. He didn't know what the patriarch had done back then, but if he could leave behind some traces, he might be able to use the same method. Thinking of this, he arrived in the dark void domain with a thought. Then he sat down and calculated to see if he could find the mysteries behind it. After this, he had some gains, but at the same time, he found that it should involve a higher level of magic power, and it wasn't something that could be comprehended in a short period of time. If he only relied on his own strength, it might be very difficult to open this door. But now that the Ancestral Master's mighty power existed in the 4 domains, it was different. Since he could use the Ancestral Master's power to refine the land of creation, it was not impossible to use it to connect to the other domains. Thinking of this, he didn't wait any longer. His consciousness came to the Whaley clone in the void and spread his magic power. A consciousness clone once again appeared in the land of fortune where Xiliang was. At this moment, his clone looked down and saw that Wan Fang and Bing Kong's clones were chanting incantations. However, this incantation didn't seem to only target Xiliang. Under the influence of the incantation, all the living beings in the domain with cultivation wiped away their mortal thoughts and calmed their hearts to comprehend. He didn't disturb the 2 of them. Instead, he stretched out his hand and pointed at the void. In an instant, a huge chaotic domain appeared there. He had seen it before, and now he found that the 4 chaotic domains looked the same on the surface, but they were actually very different. This was because the land of fortune was different. Therefore, the crux of the problem wasn't the chaotic domain itself. There was no need to deliberately pursue it. It was fine as long as it was compatible with the land of fortune. This chaotic domain was guided by his consciousness. In an instant, it approached the land of fortune, and a door between the 2 worlds opened. He thought for a moment, then sent his secondary seal into it. The next step was to try to use the Whaley left behind by the Ancestral Master. His consciousness returned to his body, and he swept his sleeve over the table. In an instant, the 2 jade pendants he had obtained from Taoist Skirich appeared. The reason why he hadn't used it during his battle with Taoist Skirich was because he'd thought that there might be other arrangements on the jade pendant that would interfere with his control of the land of serenity. After suppressing this person, he had no use for it, so he didn't take it out to look at it again. However, now that he thought about it, he still couldn't understand why Taoist Xian Che had given all the benefits to Ginseng Shao. He absolutely didn't believe that Taoist Xian Che did this to repay a favor. Then, the most likely scenario was that it was inconvenient for Taoist Xian Che to do what he wanted to do, so he wanted to borrow Taoist Skirich's hand to complete it. Moreover, he might even be able to reap the benefits in the end. If that was the case, it was very likely that the 2 jade pendants played a crucial role. Although this person and Taoist Skirich were currently suppressed in the depths of Bushu heaven and couldn't do anything, one couldn't forget that Taoist Xian Che was highly regarded by the Ancestral Master back then. This could be seen from the fact that the Ancestral Master had specially given him a land of serenity and a decree. If this place was related to some kind of arrangements left behind by the Ancestral Master, then he had to be extra careful. If some uncontrollable unforeseen event happened and alerted that existence, it would be difficult to clean up the mess. Therefore, even if the land of serenity was the most widely spread wali of the ancestral master, he didn't plan to go there. At the very least, he wouldn't make such a choice before he became the master of this place. Therefore, the place he chose this time was the land of serenity behind the auspicious origin chaotic domain. He glanced in that direction and instantly appeared there. Then, he took out the 2 jade pendants. In an instant, he felt that all of the ancestral master's wali in this place were mobilized. Then, he tried to use the method of deduction to communicate with the 2 chaotic domains. However, no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't achieve this goal. There seemed to be a barrier in front of him. His expression didn't change. This was originally within his expectations. If the ancestral master's wali couldn't directly accomplish this, then he had another choice, and that was to use this process to evolve and deduce what part he was missing. If he could make up for it, then there was still a possibility of success. After a long period of deduction, he suddenly felt something. With a wave of his sleeve, 2 large hands made of spiritual light appeared and opened the long axis. He looked over and found that under his control, the 2 domains seemed to be fusing in the silence. However, he couldn't complete the final step, as if something crucial was missing. He narrowed his eyes. At this moment, under the blessing of the ancestral master's wali, he could tell that the long axis actually wasn't completely restored. There was still a part missing on it. If he could obtain this part, then he would have a chance of accomplishing what he wanted. However, where exactly was this thing that was left outside? He tried to deduce further, but he had no clue. He guessed that it was very likely that Taoist Xian Che knew something, and that this thing might be related to his plan. However, if his guess was correct, then it was related to the most important plan of this person. His gaze couldn't help but become a little darker. It seemed that he needed to have a good talk with Taoist Xian Che. He rolled up his sleeve and put away the long axis and the 2 jade pendants. Then, he turned around and returned to Qinghuan Palace. At this moment, in the side hall, Taoist Xinchang also came to find Qin Shu. This time, he didn't only come to help Qin Shu find a way to deal with Xi Liang. He also had a little selfishness. He realized that Taoist Qing Sheng, Wan Fang, and Bing Kong had been very close recently, and he faintly felt that they were on the same side. Ever since the 2 of them entered Bushu Heaven, they had always been a man of few words. In the past, they only knew how to go along with others. However, this time, they took the initiative to make a suggestion. This showed that the 2 of them were no longer willing to remain silent. Although everyone was under Zhang Yan's protection, they also knew that a single tree couldn't hold up the fort. Just now, if they joined forces, they would be able to survive longer. He was the closest to Taoist Zhang Yuan, and Taoist Xinchang also came from the same lineage as him. However, he still remembered that it was this person who called him that. At the same time, Taoist Xinchang was also thinking about how to devour him. Moreover, Taoist Xinchang was not a scheming person, so he couldn't treat him as someone close to him. In comparison, there were actually only 2 people on their side. Compared to Qing Sheng's side, they seemed to be weaker. However, if they could rope in another person, they would at least be able to form a balance on the surface. Moreover, Qin Shu was the incarnation of the treasure spirit of creation. She was close to him, so it shouldn't be difficult for her to do this. After meeting with Qin Shu, he told her about the situation that Zhang Yan found out. He didn't hide anything about his origin. Qin Shu knew the truth. At first, she didn't believe it. Then, she was a little scared, and finally, she felt very uneasy. Even if she was just a doppelganger, she was still at the spirit refinement realm. Logically speaking, she should be able to survive. However, she also understood that if she was useless, why would these Taoist friends keep her alive? Unless they snatched the real body from Xiliang. However, when she thought about this, she didn't have the slightest confidence. Taoist Xinchang said, "Actually, Taoist friend, you're quite lucky. This body of yours isn't really a doppelganger. It's just a split consciousness. If it was destroyed in the silence, then Taoist friend wouldn't exist anymore." Fortunately, you arrived here safely. As long as you don't fall into the silence, then there's a chance for you to take back the real body. When Qinshu thought about this, she felt a lingering fear. She said uneasily, "May I ask, Taoist friend, what should I do after I come down?" Taoist Xinchang said, "Taoist friends, you're already discussing how to solve this problem. However, Taoist friend, you should know that there's someone in the silence. Our contribution is limited. In the end, you still have to rely on yourself." Qinshu also knew this, but she couldn't make up her mind. She said softly, "Taoist friend, can you give me some time to think about it?" Taoist Xinchang nodded and said, "This is a serious matter. Taoist friend, you should think about it carefully." He could understand Qinshu's hesitation at this moment. If it was a human cultivator, they would have experienced many life and death situations along the way. When it was time for them to make a decision, they would be very decisive. They wouldn't be so sloppy. However, when their treasure spirit incarnations obtained the innate creation, they also lost the challenge of tempering their temperament. Instead, their temperament was similar to that of mortals. He stood up, bowed, and said, "Then, I shall take my leave." As he said this, he turned around and left. However, just now, when he reached the door of the hall, Qinshu seemed to have suddenly thought of something. She called out to him and said, "Taoist friend, please wait." She stood up and bowed. "Taoist friend, I'm willing to do it, but I don't know how to do it. Can you teach me?" Taoist Xinchang said slowly, "Taoist friend and Xiliang are very far apart now, but it's not impossible to close the gap. At the end of the day, it's all about strengthening oneself." In reality, he really wanted to guide Qinshu on the path of self-seeking. However, the latter was only a clone. It was impossible for her to walk this path, so she could only seek help from others. Moreover, it was the most suitable path for her at the moment. Treasure spirits seeking help from others was simple. It was to devour other treasure spirits or treasure fetus. However, this matter couldn't be done by one person. It required the cooperation of others. He explained this method to Qinshu in detail before bidding farewell. Then, he returned to the main hall and explained what he was doing just now. He said, "Only Qinshu has a chance of winning against Xiliang." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "I will inform everyone." However, there was no need to think too much about the treasure spirits here. Those who had already achieved Tao, even if they found them, they would be working together. Instead, they would attack each other. Therefore, they could only search for the damaged treasure fetus. However, this would require Child Xinchang's help. After all, he was especially sensitive to such things. When he thought of this, he shook his head and smiled. Child Xinchang repeatedly said that it was not good. Perhaps this was the answer. However, this was still too slow. If he wanted to take down the land of creation as soon as possible, he still needed to try and see if he could open a path to the chaotic realm. After Taoist Xinchang left, he sank his consciousness and went to the depths of Busu Tian. Chapter 2056. In the blink of an eye, Zhang Yan had already sunk into the depths of Busu Tian. Towering Sky, Rendu, and Xian Che were all suppressed here. They were constantly fighting against Busu Tian's endless wei, so they had no time to think about anything else. Unless he, the master, took the initiative to withdraw or something unexpected happened, this situation would only continue until they died forever. At this moment, he withdrew his mind and slowly moved the wei that was covering this person's body. Taoist Xian Che suddenly felt the pressure on his body loosen a little. He knew that Zhang Yan had arrived. He looked up and saw the figure with profound energy soaring into the sky and 5 lights shining on his back. He said coldly, "What are you doing here again?" Zhang Yan smiled faintly. He waved his sleeve and took out the 2 jade pendants and the long scroll, letting them float outside. When Taoist Xian Che saw that towering sky was also suppressed here, he knew that these 2 items had definitely fallen into Zhang Yan's hands. However, when he saw that the latter had taken them out, he couldn't help but frown and say, "What do you mean by this, sir?" Zhang Yan looked at him and said, "Recently, when I was circulating my energy, I realized that this scroll still lacks an item to guide it. Sir, I believe that you know where it is." Taoist Xian Che only snorted. Zhang Yan's gaze turned to the jade pendant, then looked at Xian Che and said, "Sir, you entrusted this token and even the land of creation to Towering Sky for safekeeping. I thought about it. There is no oath between us, but sir, you trust this person so much, so I believe that you have a backup plan." Taoist Xian Che said, "What's the point of saying this now?" Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said, "Indeed, you are suppressed here. No matter what plan you have, you can't execute it even if you want to. However, we are currently fighting against the sky-leaving tribulation. If there is a magic treasure that can help me fight against that existence, then I can't let go of it." Taoist Xian Che scoffed and said, "That's your business. What does it have to do with me? I don't have to worry about these things in Bushu heaven." Zhang Yan said, "Bushutian can indeed stop that person now, but he may not be able to in the future. As the saying goes, when the nest is overturned, there are no intact eggs. At that time, it will be difficult for you to escape the tribulation of silence." Taoist Xian Che's eyelids drooped and he didn't say a word. He looked as if he wouldn't cooperate no matter what she said. Zhang Yan looked at him and said, "Have you ever thought of going out?" Taoist Xian Che's heart jolted. Zhang Yan continued, "If you are willing to tell me about this, I can set a time limit for you to be imprisoned. By then, no matter what happens outside, I can let you out." When Taoist Xian Che heard this, he could not help but ponder seriously. A soul refinement cultivator did not care about the length of time. If Zhang Yan could really set a time limit for him to be released, then that would naturally be good. However, he judged others by himself and did not trust Zhang Yan. A soul refinement cultivator could not be bound by oaths. Even if he swore to the patriarch, it would be useless. If Zhang Yan still continued to suppress him here after learning about the true whereabouts of that item, then he would be completely helpless. Zhang Yan said indifferently, "You should know that it is useless for you to guard this item. Even if you don't say it now, I will find out sooner or later. Moreover, I has already passed the stage of understanding the truth. Once I advance to the next level, these things will be meaningless to me. If you tell me now and set a time limit, then I will give you freedom. If you don't tell me, then don't expect to be freed in the future." He could feel that when his cultivation reached the second stage, he would also have the ability to pass through the chaotic domain. However, once he entered this realm, he would definitely lead everyone to the void to help that Taoist. Therefore, when that time came, these items would not be of much value to him. Before that, in order to prevent anything from happening to Bu Su Tian, he would definitely punish the three of them. Taoist Xian Che could naturally hear the meaning behind Zhang Yan's words. He said coldly, "If I don't obey, are you prepared to banish me to the void?" Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "After all, we are of the same bloodline. You are also the ancestral master's disciple, so I will not banish you. However, in order to prevent you from messing things up, I might have to force you into eternal silence. I believe that the ancestral master will not blame you after he finds out." Taoist Xian Che was shocked. If he was only banished to the void, he might actually be able to escape with that item. Therefore, he was not very afraid of this. In fact, he even hoped that the other party would do so. However, if the other party planned to use the power of creation to suppress him into eternal silence, then he had no hope at all. It should be known that he was currently doing his best to deal with Bu Su Tian's Weili, but this did not mean that Zhang Yan could not exert more pressure on him. If the latter was determined to punish him, he would definitely not be able to withstand it. He looked up and said, "I am the ancestral master's direct disciple. Who are you to dare to punish me like this?" Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "Although we are of the same bloodline, we are from different sections. You disobeyed the ancestral master's order, so why can't I punish you? Moreover, my teacher does not have a seniority system. As the hall master of Qinsang School, I only need to respect the sect master and the ancestral master, and I will naturally be able to do this." Taoist Xian Che's expression changed slightly. He understood immediately. If Zhang Yan's teacher did not have a seniority system, then it meant that although Zhang Yan was a direct disciple of the sect, no one could control him except for the ancestral master. In this case, it was impossible for him to use seniority system to control him. He could not help but ponder silently. Zhang Yan did not urge him. As long as the other party could still correctly judge the situation, he should know what to do. After a long time, Taoist Xian Che finally made a decision. He raised his head and said, "I can tell you about this, but that item is difficult for others to obtain except for me. Even if you are from the same sect, you are not an exception." Zhang Yan said, "You can tell me where this item is first. If there is a need, I will naturally ask you to come out." Taoist Xian Che thought for a while and nodded. He chanted a secret incantation and said, "Based on this, I can see that this item is real. I believe that you can distinguish whether it is real or fake." Although Zhang Yan had never heard of this secret incantation, he naturally knew that it was real after hearing it. Taoist Xian Che said, "I hope that you can keep your promise." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "If I can really see that item, I will naturally come and give you an explanation." He changed his mind. As his sleeve fluttered, endless Weili pressed down and suppressed him again. Then, he changed his mind and returned to Qinghuan Palace. When he sat down, he spread out the long scroll and chanted a secret incantation in his heart. After a while, a spiritual light bloomed above him. He suddenly felt his mind empty, as if he had jumped out of existence. He discovered that there was a long river floating in the divine will, but he could not get close to it. He immediately knew that this was the item he was looking for. He thought in his heart. After Xian Che was suppressed, he should not have any magic tools on him anymore. That person said that he was the only one who could obtain this item. Perhaps he thought that the ancestral Weili only recognized him, but he did not think so. Just like how the secondary seal of Hall Master Du Jin could use the ancestral Weili in the land of creation, perhaps the authority of that person was above him with the 2 jade pendants, but now that he was suppressed, it was impossible for him to interfere in this matter. Just as he was thinking about this, the primary seal of Hall Master Du Jin suddenly leaped into the divine will. Then, it emitted a faint spiritual light. In just an instant, he found himself standing on the river bank. He looked over and found that as the river surged, all kinds of secret arts of Qinsang school could be seen. He could even vaguely see the art of spirit refinement flowing past. Not only that, this place was completely formed by the ancestral Weili. It was hazy and vast. He raised his sleeves and bowed to this long river. Then, he stretched out his hand and cupped a palm full of water. Then, he waved his sleeve and sprinkled it downwards. As if everything had lost its obstruction, the water directly seeped into the chaotic domain he created. When he looked again, he saw that this place was the same as the other chaotic domains. It was already filled with the great underworld ancestral Weili. Now, he only needed to go back and try to push it, and it would not be difficult for him to connect these chaotic domains. He did not think that this matter would be solved so easily. In fact, when he thought about it carefully, this was not unbelievable. This was because the Weili left behind by the great underworld ancestral master was clearly of a higher level, which was why he could do this. If he could use this entire long river, he would even dare to directly go against that existence. However, at this moment, he felt that his divine will seemed to be missing something. After a little calculation, he could not help but understand. Although this long river seemed endless, it was specific to each person. He could not take it unscrupulously. Every time he used it, it would be a little less. Once it was used up, he might not be able to come here anymore. It was obvious that it was impossible to use this to fight against that existence. However, he did not feel regretful. After cultivating to the second stage, it did not matter whether he came or not. On the other hand, this place reflected the secret arts of Qinsang school. Presumably, if people from other sects came here, they would also be able to see the secret arts of their own sect. In the future, it could be left for those who had hopes of climbing the Great Tao to have a look. He thought that the great underworld ancestral master had left this place to prepare for a rainy day. If the ancestral master had taken the land of fortune from someone of the same generation, then it was possible that someone else had taken it away. With this backup plan, even if the land of fortune was stolen, later generations could use the whaley to take it back at a critical moment. Presumably, the ancestral master had entrusted this matter to Xian-che, the disciple who had the highest chance of becoming a refined god. However, in the end, Xian-che had passed the jade pendant and the land of fortune to Daoist Soaring Sky. In the past, he did not know why Daoist Soaring Sky had done this, but it was not difficult to deduce the general reason based on these clues. It was very likely that Daoist Soaring Sky was unwilling to face the tribulation of leaving the sky, or perhaps he was afraid of that existence, so he wanted to borrow the power of others to protect himself. That was why he lured Daoist Soaring Sky and the others here. Although Daoist Soaring Sky had become the master of the land of fortune and thought that he had gained a great advantage, he did not know that he had been within Daoist Soaring Sky's calculations from the beginning to the end. As long as Daoist Soaring Sky was willing, he could borrow the ancestral master's whaley at any time and take back the authority of the land of fortune. Zhang Yan shook his head. Daoist Soaring Sky could have openly unified the four regions and used the ancestral master's inheritance to fight against that existence, but in the end, he made this kind of inferior choice. However, everyone had their own path of cultivation. Putting aside the standpoint of the sect, it could not be said that Daoist Soaring Sky had made a mistake. He looked into the depths of the void, his eyes cold. Since Daoist Soaring Sky was unwilling to shoulder this heavy responsibility, then he would be the one to finish this tribulation. Chapter 2057. After Zhang Yan retreated from the divine decree, he rolled up his sleeves and put away the jade pendant and the long scroll on the table. Then, he returned to the land of creation of Ji Yuan. He took out the seal of Hall Master Du Zhen and used the ancestral whaley of this place to try to connect the two chaotic domains. This time, it was very smooth. He did not encounter the previous obstacle. With a gentle push, the door between the two worlds was opened. This meant that his original body could fall into the chaotic domain at any time and sink into the land of creation. However, only he, the heavenly master Busu, could do this. If it was a master of a land of creation who was slightly inferior, he would not be able to do this. He checked and saw that there were no mistakes. Then, he summoned Jing Yu and said, "Go and invite fellow Daoist Qin Chang and fellow Daoist Qin Shu to this place." Jing Yu obeyed and went to pass on the edict. Not long after, Qin Shu arrived first. However, she was a little uneasy. After knowing the truth about her, she was very afraid that her fellow Taoists here would abandon her. When she arrived at the bottom of the stairs, she bowed and said, "May I know why fellow Taoist is looking for me?" Zhang Yan said, "Fellow Taoist, you can go to the side and take a seat first. When fellow Taoist Xinchang arrives, I will explain to you." When Qin Shu heard that Taoist Xinchang was coming, her heart calmed down a little. Both of them were treasure spirits. In addition, Taoist Xinchang had taught her the Dharma formulation last time, so she trusted him a lot. She thanked him and went to sit down. After a while, Taoist Xinchang's clone also arrived. After bowing, he also sat down. Zhang Yan said to the two of them, "I have found a way to avoid the one in the void and pass to the land of creation." When Taoist Xinchang heard this, he became slightly spirited. If they could avoid that one, then most of the problems could be solved. Zhang Yan looked at Qin Shu and said, "It is up to fellow Taoist to come down. If you are willing, I can send you back and help you take back your original body." When Qin Shu heard what she said, she was both surprised and delighted. Even though she had been taught by Taoist Xinchang, she still did not have any nourishment from the precious embryo. Her abilities were still the same as before, so she did not trust herself. She said softly, "I'm afraid that my mana is too meager to defeat Xi Liang." Taoist Xinchang advised, "Fellow Taoist, do not worry about this. Since fellow Taoist Xianyuan can go to the domain, you can help. In a battle of consciousness, it is very important to maintain one's mind. The more you are, the weaker you will be. the more you fear, the weaker you will be. However, as long as you do not lose your obsession, it is not, and will, Taoist, Jiu, it, will, and dynasty. Chen Shu was still a little uneasy when she heard this. She said, but in terms of obsession, Xi Liang even fell into obsession because of it. Isn't that 100 times better than me? Zhang Yan said, fellow Taoist, you have overlooked something. If Xi Liang is conscious, it would be extremely difficult for us to do this. However, fellow Taoist, you must know that Xi Liang's mind is not clear and it is difficult for him to make a decision. At this moment, his defense is at its weakest. When you enter and invade his consciousness, I will also suppress him from the outside, causing him to be unable to focus on the inside. Therefore, fellow Taoist, you have a good chance. However, Chen Shu lowered her head and did not speak for a long time. Zhang Yan knew that Chen Shu was hesitating because she felt that it was not a bad idea to hide here and continue like this. If she really had no way out, she would not think about these things anymore. She could only fight with all her might. However, there was no need for him to remind her of this. She should be able to think it through herself. At this moment, Taoist Xinchang tried to give Chen Shu some advice. He said, fellow Taoist, with that person above me, if I do not fight back, I will be devoured by him. No one can escape from this, and fellow Taoist cannot be alone. If you can take back your true body, you will be able to make your own decisions. Then, there will be no need for you to live under someone else's roof and serve them. Chen Shu bit her lip and finally made up her mind. She raised her head and said, Chen Shu will listen to the two of you. Zhang Yan nodded slightly and said, there is no need to delay this matter. The sooner it is resolved, the better. The two of you, please follow me. He waved his sleeve and a door opened in the hall. Then, he left his seat and strode inside. Priest Xinchang and Chen Shu rose from their seats and followed him through the door. Both of them felt their spirits waver for a moment before they found themselves standing in a vast domain. Then, their eyes wavered again and the scenery around them changed again. They found themselves on a continent. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. Wan Fang and Bing Kong's avatars were chanting incantations here. When they sensed the three of them coming here, they did not know what had happened. They hurriedly came over to greet them and asked Zhang Yan, fellow Taoist, do you have any instructions for us? Zhang Yan said, let I and fellow Taoist Xinchang handle the following matters. You two Taoists can look after us from the side. When Wan Fang and Bing Kong heard this, they naturally had no objections. They bowed to the three of them and retreated to the side. Zhang Yan looked into the depths of this place and saw that the spiritual fire that was originally lying still suddenly rose. In a flash, it seemed like the entire place of creation had fallen into a sea of fire. Ever since he entered this place, no matter how he tried to restrain his supernatural power, the oppressive feeling he could bring about was too strong. Xi Liang had already been startled awake from his deep sleep. However, this was unavoidable. As long as they had ill intentions, they would be alarmed eventually. He flicked his finger and a wave of creation Weili was directly sent to Chen Shu to help her stabilize her body. Then, he said, with us as your backing, fellow Taoist can do whatever you want. Chen Shu only felt that her qi activity had become much stronger under the Weili's support. She could not help but feel a little more confident. She bowed to the four of them and walked into the open fire. In an instant, she had already disappeared. She had passed into Xi Liang's consciousness. After Xi Liang woke up, the first thing he did was to swallow all the treasure spirit's incarnations. Then, he instinctively used all the power of creation here to sweep towards Zhang Yan, trying to force him out. Zhang Yan's expression was calm. He immediately used the creation Weili's protection and easily stayed in this place. Not only that, but he also protected Xinchang and the others. This opponent had not even passed the enlightenment stage and had even fallen into a side path because of his cultivation. He was far weaker than Taoist Xin Shao and posed no threat to him at all. If he personally fought, it would not be difficult to take him down in a short time. However, both of them were here. If they fought, the collision of magic power would definitely disturb this place of creation. He still remembered that when the clear sink chaotic territory fell into chaos last time, that existence's chi activity incarnation also invaded this place. That time, he was lucky to escape, but this time might not be the case. Therefore, he had to avoid this as much as possible. Letting Chen Shu seize the real body was completely a battle between divine wills, so it would not cause too much of a commotion. In reality, even if he really did occupy this place, it would not be a good choice. This place was not set up by the patriarch in advance. If he wanted to become the master, he could only rely on his own power to refine it. Not only would he not know how long it would take, he would also risk being robbed by that existence at any time. Therefore, no matter how one looked at it, Chen Shu was undoubtedly the best choice to become the master of this place. If he wanted to fight that existence alone, he could only rely on them in the end. Taoist Xinchang sighed and said, "Now, we can only hope that fellow Taoist Chen Shu can make it through this stage." Zhang Yan's eyes were deep. Right now, he was only trying to ensure that he, Xinchang, and the others were not expelled. This way, he could not only increase the pressure on Xi Liang, but also not put Xi Liang's life in danger. He could try to maintain the intensity of the confrontation between the two sides as much as possible. If Chen Shu's side progressed smoothly, then he could try to increase the pressure. In reality, if the two sides cooperated well, it would not be difficult to take down Xi Liang. However, if Chen Shu failed this time, then he would have to do it himself. If there were any loopholes, he could only think of a way to make up for it later. Not long after, the spiritual fire swayed violently, causing the entire place of creation to tremble. When Zhang Yan saw this, he immediately used Weili to suppress the commotion and did his best to maintain the stability of this place. Taoist Xinchang looked down and asked in concentration, "What's going on?" Zhang Yan looked into the depths of the place of creation. To outsiders, the battle of wills would not last for long. Just now, he could feel that the qi activity that belonged to Xi Liang was gradually decreasing. If there were no accidents, the victor should have been decided by now. After a while, the spiritual fire that covered the entire place of creation suddenly converged into a cluster of fire. It swayed for a while, and a graceful figure appeared. As the flames moved away, Chen Shu, who was dressed in a red lotus robe, walked out. However, at this moment, her expression and aura were no longer timid and hesitant. Her eyes were filled with confidence as she looked around. She came before the four of them and bowed. She said, "Thank you for your help, fellow Taoists. I have just now taken back this true body." Zhang Yan looked at her and knew her current state. This time, it could be said that it was a success, but it was not complete. Xi Liang must have sensed that Chen Shu would have a higher chance of passing the test of Jizhen. Under the push of this obsession, he did not have a sense of self at all. Hence, he took the initiative to transfer his body to Chen Shu. It was no wonder that the entire process was so smooth. This was something that could not be predicted. However, because of this, Chen Shu could not help but be stained with something that originally belonged to Xi Liang. However, from the looks of it, this was still a good thing. At least, the part that belonged to Chen Shu was still more than half. Zhang Yan said, "Since fellow Taoist has succeeded, then I and the others will take our leave." Chen Shu looked at him and said, "I still have some loose ends to deal with. After I've sorted them out, I will come and pay my respects to fellow Taoists." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. With a thought, he brought his 3 clones back to Bu Su Heaven from the chaotic domain and let them go. Now that this matter was over, he no longer had to worry about the land of creation being taken away by that existence. Now, he could turn his attention to his own internal affairs. Ever since he saw the Weili River left behind by the great underworld patriarch, he had been considering whether he should borrow the patriarch's Weili to directly take the clear sink chaotic domain into his palm and become the master of the 4 domains. Another land of creation would undoubtedly help him improve his cultivation. However, the patriarch's Weili had a limit. Every time he used it, it would be a little less. After all, it could even be used to fight against that existence. If that Taoist seemed to be unable to hold on any longer, then he could use the Patriarch's Weili to help at any time. As for these two paths, one was slightly more conservative, while the other was slightly more radical. It all depended on how he chose. Chapter 2058. After careful consideration, Zhang Yan decided that it was best to take the land of pure serenity into his hands first. Although the ancestral master's power was amazing, it was not something that belonged to him. He could use it as a stepping stone, but he could not rely on it. As long as he could climb to the second stage, even if he had to give up all the Weili, he could still enter the void and fight with that person. With this decision in mind, he immediately came to the land of serenity and fortune. He sat down and used the ancestral master's Weili to look into the depths of this domain. With the help of this power, he saw the location of the origin heart in an instant. With a thought, he fused it into his body. The power of creation here immediately surged, but after a while, it calmed down again. Zhang Yan's eyes lit up. In a flash, the world suddenly turned dark and white, as if the universe had been destroyed. Then, layers of Xian Qi surged out from his body and instantly covered the entire land of pure serenity. At this moment, this place was already his. At this point, the land of creation of the four domains left behind by the great underworld patriarch was in his hands. At the same time, he could feel the endless principles of the great Tao reflected in his body, corroborating with what he had learned in the past. As his understanding of the Xian Qi deepened, his cultivation unknowingly increased. After a long time, this upward momentum stopped just now. He could feel that he was only a step away from the second stage realm. He was seeking both external and internal methods. Now that he had the four domains, he had accumulated enough external methods. Now, all he needed was his own accumulation. This was mainly to understand the key points and the understanding of the upper realm. This realm was completely different from the path he had taken before. Only when he had a complete understanding of it could he truly step into it. In other words, if one's understanding was unclear or deviated, it was possible that they would end up on a different path. However, he had the Weili River passed down by the ancestral master. At least he could use the methods of the predecessors as reference. He thought for a while and looked at a certain place in Bushutian. The rest of the chaotic realm was not close to Busu Tian, but as his cultivation grew, he could feel that it was faintly compatible with Busu Tian's strange power. It was just that the time was not right, so he could not see the inside story. Fortunately, the internal situation had already been straightened out. Even if there were those strange forces, there wouldn't be any problems for the time being. Next, he could go all out and strive to enter the second stage realm as soon as possible. Before that, he had to take care of some trivial matters. With a thought, he returned to Qinghuan Palace and sat on his seat. With a flick of his finger, a spiritual light shot toward the depths of Busu Tian. He did not forget his promise to Taoist Xian Che. He sent an avatar to Taoist Xian Che. After a while, the incarnation had already turned around. It had already set a date with Taoist Xian Che and said that it would naturally release the person when the time came. This date was set for a long time. At that time, he would definitely be in the second stage realm. However, for soul refinement cultivators, as long as there was a fixed date, they would eventually be able to escape. Thus, Taoist Xian Che had no objections to this. After this matter was settled, he focused his mind on the place where Busu Tian had landed. In an instant, a sky rose there, and a palace floated out of it. Right now, because everyone's Weili avatars were fighting against the fluctuations of magic power in the void, whenever they encountered something important and wanted to discuss with him, they would go to Qinghuan Palace. This was also inconvenient, so he simply opened up another sky in Busu Tian as a meeting place for everyone. This place was built in an instant. He waved his sleeve and walked inside. With a thought, he instantly set up various restrictions and casually pointed at a formation spirit. The formation spirit swayed, and a tall and handsome young man walked out. He bowed and said, "Greetings, Master." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "From now on, I will leave this place to you. Take my talisman order and invite the 3 Dao sovereigns here. The young man agreed and received a talisman order from the tablet in front of the hall. He split into 3 incarnations and sent them to Jiyuan, Qingchen, and Fuli respectively. Not long after, Sun Yu, Luo Zhan, and Miao Yu all arrived. They entered the hall and bowed in unison. Daoist Sun Yu said, Grand Supreme summoned us here. Is there another decree? Zhang Yan bowed and said, I have already refined the fortune of the 4 regions. However, I will not occupy this place for long. When that existence is expelled, or when someone in your sect achieves the soul refinement realm, I will naturally return. Daoist Sun Yu shook his head and said, the ancestral master's decree was for a junior disciple to rule the 4 regions. Since Grand Supreme Xian Che is unable to bear this responsibility, then it should be done by the Grand Supreme. Zhang Yan smiled and said, this matter is still far away. There is no need to determine the result now. Let's leave it for the future. I invited the 4 of you here today because the ancestral master left behind a place that can help the juniors improve their cultivation and solve their problems. I think that all of you should know about this. If you are interested, I can send all of you here to take a look. In order to fight against that existence, he was trying his best to rope in more people. However, it would be even better if these people came from the same bloodline and sect. However, it was not easy to become a soul refinement realm cultivator. It was completely dependent on fate and luck. However, as long as there was a trace of hope, they could not easily give up. Moreover, the Weili River that the ancestral master left behind was originally for the juniors to see. Therefore, regardless of whether they succeeded or not, Sun Yu and the others still had a chance in it. When Daoist Sun Yu heard that the ancestral master's legacy was left outside, he hurriedly said, since it is a place left behind by the ancestral master, we brothers and sisters will naturally go and pay our respects. Zhang Yan said, since that is the case, I will send all of you on your way. After all, that was the ancestral master's Weili River. If they wanted to go there by themselves, they would have to first sense and pay their respects. It would take a lot of effort and they might not get any results even after a long time. Therefore, he might as well help them out. Thus, with a thought, he brought the 3 of them above the Weili River. The moment the 3 of them saw the surging river in front of them, they felt countless dharma and profound truths surging into their bodies. Instantly, they felt dizzy, as if there were waves crashing against their hearts. They couldn't help but be shocked and didn't dare to look at anything else. They just sat down and maintained the order of their hearts to avoid falling into it. After a long time, the 3 of them finally stabilized their minds just now. Zhang Yan said, the Weili here is limited to everyone. You can take as much as you deem fit. If you are too greedy now, it will be difficult for you to come here in the future. Sun Yu bowed and said, thank you for your reminder, Daoist. Zhang Yan nodded at him and walked into the river alone. With a flash, his entire body was submerged in it. Then, he focused his attention on the tide. This time, he wanted to investigate the mysteries of the second stage. As the waves revolved around him, layers of profound truths appeared. However, at the same time, the amount of Weili he could draw from the river was also being consumed rapidly. After more than half of the Weili had dissipated, he retreated from it. He still had some Weili left. Logically speaking, he should be able to continue and see more. However, he felt that there was no need. After all, although the Taishian true technique he cultivated was derived from the 9 true scriptures, it was not the same as what the great underworld patriarch had passed down. Therefore, the patriarch's dharma could only be studied and it might not be suitable for him. There was also no need to regard it as a guide. If he could take it, he would take it. If he should discard it, he would discard it. He still had to walk his own path. Seeing that there was nothing he needed in this place, he left Sun Yu and the other 2 here. Then, he changed his mind and returned to the palace. At this moment, the young array spirit came up and bowed. Master, Lady Qinshu is here to visit. Zhang Yan nodded and said, let her in. Go and invite the other Taoists over. As his order was passed down, the clones of the spirit refinement realm cultivators appeared in the hall. After a short while, Qinshu walked in as well. Unlike before, her expression and bearing had become natural and unrestrained. She looked towards the interior of the hall and bowed towards everyone. She said, "I've received the help of all of you this time." This time, even though Xi Liang had given his body to her of his own accord, if it wasn't for Zhang Yan's help, Xi Liang would have directly devoured her, and there wouldn't have been any karma between them. Moreover, she was very clear that although she had become the master of a land of fortune, if that existence got rid of his opponent, he would definitely attack a similar place. She was also one of his targets. Compared to the other Taoists here, she was alone and had no one to help her. If that existence deliberately targeted her, she would not be able to do anything alone. Therefore, the passage between the chaotic regions must be preserved. If she could not hold on, she could still find a way to ask for help, or she could use this opportunity to hide in Bushu heaven. Taoist Xinchang asked politely, "What do you plan to do next?" At this moment, Qinshu lowered her posture to an extremely low level. She bowed again and said, "I'm willing to exchange pointers with fellow Taoists. It's just that the technique that I'm cultivating is inseparable from the treasured embryo of good fortune. I'll need everyone's help here." Her change of consciousness was equivalent to cleansing herself. Originally, Xi Liang was seeking both himself and the outside world. This was especially difficult to understand the truth. However, after she obtained a bit of Xi Liang's consciousness, she did not dare to take this path anymore. She decided to seek the path of seeking outside. However, this method required finding treasured embryos. She did not have much of an advantage compared to others. Instead, there were many Taoists here that she could ask for help. As long as they paid some attention while searching for the fragments of fortune, it would be better than searching for them alone. Everyone nodded as well, and they naturally had no intention to object. At the very least, there was a blessed place behind Qinshu, and adding another person would mean that they would have another path of retreat. It was better to form a good relationship than to offend her. In any case, this matter was something that could be done in passing. Zhang Yan said from his seat, "Since Taoist is here to comprehend the Tao, I hope that Taoist can help us when we fight against that existence." Qinshu straightened her expression and raised her voice to reply, "This is also reasonable. If there is such a day, I will fight the enemy with everyone." Chapter 2059. After Qinshu finished, she solemnly bowed to the seat and said, "However, I have a request that I don't know if Taoist friend will allow it." Zhang Yan said, "Taoist friend, please speak." Qinshu said, "If my avatar enters the void of solitude, can it borrow strength from Taoist friend?" Since she had to work together with everyone to fight against that existence, she would need to form a Wei avatar to enter the void of solitude. As the master of the place of creation, she did not need Zhang Yan to give her the creation Wei. However, this would easily expose her hiding place, unlike Bushutian. That existence already knew about this place and did not care about this. Therefore, it was better for her to borrow the creation Wei under Zhang Yan's rule. Even though this would make her more reliant on this place, it would also make the relationship between them closer. The advantages outweighed the disadvantages. Zhang Yan nodded and said, "This is a small matter. As you wish, Taoist friend, you can go to the mystic instrument I forged later and transfer your Qi's activity." Qinshu's wish was fulfilled and she quickly thanked him. Zhang Yan looked to his left and right, asking everyone if there was anything else. Everyone replied that there was nothing else, and he dismissed everyone. Qinshu left the hall and walked with Taoist Xinchang to search for the mystic instrument. At this moment, she heard a call from behind. It was Luan Fang and Bing Kong. She said, "Taoist friends, do you have anything to say?" Luan Fang said, "We have something to discuss with Taoist friend." Taoist Xinchang saw this and said, "I will wait for Taoist friend in the front hall." With that, he left first. Qinshu responded and turned around to look at the two. She said, "What do you want to talk about?" Luan Fang bowed and said, "I wonder if Taoist Qinshu will allow us to enter your realm to comprehend the Tao." What he and Bing Kong practiced was a method of seeking external help. This method usually required one to borrow the essence of creation and observe the principles of the Great Tao in order to increase their cultivation. In the past, they relied on the essence of creation. However, it would be better if they could immerse themselves in the land of creation. It was just that they never had the chance to do so in the past. Although they were now in this world, they were living under someone else's roof. If Zhang Yan didn't take the initiative to mention it, they wouldn't dare to have such thoughts. Now that Chen Shu had a land of creation, she was naturally interested in it. Chen Shu frowned slightly. After listening to Daoist Xin Chang's explanation of the cultivation method, she understood what he wanted. If it didn't harm her, she would be happy to give him face. However, if he stayed in the land of creation for a long time and used it to comprehend, it would reduce the size of this place. Although she didn't need to cultivate here, this was her place of protection. She couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Hence, she replied, this place involves my Tao, so please forgive me for not being able to accept it. Although Wan Fong was rejected, he wasn't angry. He said, Daoist friend, you've misunderstood. The two of us don't have the intention to invade your realm. If we find a precious embryo, we're willing to make an exchange with you. We'll comprehend it for a while and then leave. We won't stay for long. Chen Shu said, let me think about it myself. Wan Fong smiled and said, that's how it should be. Sorry for troubling you this time. Chen Shu bowed and apologized to the two before she left. When she reached the front hall, Daoist Xin Chang saw that her expression was strange. He asked, may I know why the two of them are looking for you? After Chen Shu explained the situation, Daoist Xin Chang pondered for a while and said, I think that if the two of them really found a precious embryo, why don't you accept it? Chen Shu instantly looked displeased. She said, could it be that you're trying to persuade me to give in? Xin Chang Daoist shook his head and said, my friend, although the place of creation can protect you, it is not as good as Bu Su Tian where we are. If you are attacked by that person, even if you are not injured, it will be difficult to defend yourself. If you can reduce some of the damage, you can improve your cultivation, and it is worth it. Chen Shu thought about it seriously and said, you're right. Daoist Xin Chang said happily, it's good that you understand. In this way, both sides will benefit. The most important thing now is to fight against that person. As long as we can achieve this, we can put the rest aside. After everyone left, Zhang Yan's consciousness returned to Qinghuan Palace. After sitting in seclusion for a few days, his heart suddenly sensed something, and with a thought, he moved Sun Yu and the other two out from the long river of mighty power. When the three of them reached the outer room, they bowed and said, thank you for your help, Grand Elder. Zhang Yan said, the three of you must have gained a lot from this trip. Daoist Sun Yu sighed and said, indeed, a lot. I just don't know when I can come back here again. They had seen enough things this time, so it was meaningless to stay any longer. In fact, he also understood that if they couldn't cultivate to the spirit refinement realm, then there was no need for them to come back anymore. These were enough for them to comprehend. After the three of them thanked him again, they bid farewell and left. Zhang Yan pondered for a while. Now that there was nothing to worry about both inside and outside, the next step was to go all out and strive to reach the second stage as soon as possible. Previously, through the Patriarch's Weili River, he had glimpsed many secrets about the second stage. However, he only touched on the surface and didn't really delve into it. It wasn't that he couldn't look deeper into it, but it was because the great underworld Patriarch's imprint had long been branded on it. The more he looked at it, the more he would be affected, and it was extremely likely that he would deviate from his own path. Therefore, when he looked at the river, he only experienced the various kinds of divine Weili abilities that might come with reaching the second stage, and not simply described the Patriarch's Weili description of this realm. As for what would happen after entering this realm, it was entirely up to him. Currently, he had a relatively complete understanding of this realm. Moreover, his foundation was stable, and he seemed to have accumulated enough on the surface. Therefore, if everything went smoothly, he would be able to attempt to step into the second stage. However, he wasn't in a hurry to pass it, because a cultivator's own senses were especially important during the process of ascending. If he felt that he was perfect, then he would most likely be able to succeed. However, if he felt that he was still lacking, then it was extremely likely that he wouldn't be able to succeed. At this moment, after a round of self-examination, he found that there were still some flaws in his understanding. After some thought, he tried to ask himself. After a series of questions, he found that the answer he gave was that he had to reach the state of no increase, no decrease, no misgivings, and no doubt, in order to not reveal any flaws after entering this realm. Otherwise, just self-doubt would drag down one's cultivation, and it would also leave enough flaws for one's opponent. However, after some more calculations, he found that it was impossible to achieve. Because there was nothing without flaws in everything. If he really didn't have these, then he would lose the ability to change, and there would be no way to advance. Especially when it was impossible for him to understand all the changes after this realm, so how could he block up all the flaws in his path towards the Tao? Therefore, if he really reached that realm, there would definitely be flaws. Even those great cultivators of the past were the same. The only thing he could do was to find ways to make up for the flaws in time. Thinking to there, a flash of inspiration appeared in his mind. The best way was to continue improving after entering this realm. That way, even if there were flaws, they would be left behind. That way, he would be able to make up for both flaws and change at the same time. As these thoughts flowed through his mind, he suddenly felt that the path ahead of him was clear. However, even though he had solved most of the problems, he also found that there was still a trace of a burden in his senses. After asking himself, he found that his comprehension of the upper realm was lacking. Since he had this feeling, then he needed to find a way to solve it. He thought about it. If he wanted to learn more about the mysteries of the upper realm, then he could only think of a way from that being. Although he had seen many things from the other party in the previous confrontation, it was still an extremely great risk. If he had been careless and his clone had been destroyed, not only would he have gained little, but more information would have been leaked. He couldn't help but ponder. If he could have a confrontation with that existence and successfully retreat, then through this collision of magic power, he would be able to see everything he needed to know. Unfortunately, it was impossible for his original body to go into the void. If he only went with his Whaley clone, then it would be insufficient. Before he could reach that being, he would probably be shattered by the mana ripples. However, there was another way. That was to bring out all the power that he could from the Patriarch's Whaley River and bring it out to face that being. That way, he would be able to understand more through the fusion of mana, and at the same time, he would be able to help that Taoist. Thinking about this, his eyes flickered a few times. He felt that this was a feasible method. The Patriarch's Whaley was no longer of much use to him. Moreover, he had really entered the second realm, so he didn't need these anymore. He might as well use them now. After making this decision, he turned his consciousness and went to the Whaley River. He bowed and then rolled up his sleeves. With a bang, the river suddenly flew up. As if a dam had burst open, it flowed into the land of creation. When the water reached there, under the guidance of his will, it instantly condensed into a doppelganger. Then, he guided the mighty force of creation to condense it, and the chi activity rose layer by layer. Not long after, it had already leaped over the original body, and it was still rising. When he looked again, he found that there was nothing beside him. There was no trace of the Whaley River. However, this was only because he had taken away the portion of Whaley that he could use. If Sun Yu and the others came here again, they would still be able to see it. He retreated from his consciousness and said to the clone, "Thank you, fellow Taoist." The clone smiled and said, "You and I are one, so there is no need to thank me. This trip will be a success for me." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. At this moment, a clear light suddenly shone in front of him. The clone created by the great underworld patriarchs Whaley and Bushtian's Whaley suddenly disappeared. When he turned to look, he found that it had already crossed into the void and split the mana ripples from both sides, heading towards the place where the battle was. Chapter 2060. The closer Zhang Yan's clone got to the place where the mana collided, the stronger the resistance in front of him. He had to keep using the Weili on his body to open up a path in order to continue moving forward. The ancestral master's Weili was limitless, and he was not afraid of exhausting it. However, because he was not the owner of the mana and had only borrowed it temporarily, the power was disappearing at every moment and could not last for long. In other words, regardless of whether he used this power to fight against the enemy or not, it was constantly decreasing. In the end, it would all disappear. Therefore, he had to find that existence before this power disappeared completely and fight with him directly instead of letting it be exhausted here. He deduced that the reason why he had been lingering outside for so long without being able to see the owner was perhaps because his power level was slightly lower, so it was difficult for him to break through the final barrier. At this moment, a sword light suddenly appeared in front of him. Like a flash of lightning in the haze, it split open the path in front of him in an instant, and all the obstacles in the surroundings disappeared at once. His heart moved slightly. He knew that it was the Taoist who had helped to guide him, so he did not hesitate. With just one step, he had already entered the battlefield. He looked up and saw that the Taoist was still standing there with his back facing him. He did not turn around. There was nothing in front of him, only the omnipresent malice and darkness that devoured everything. Everything in the world that came into contact with there was no more rotation of life and death, and there were no more collisions of mana. Everything disappeared directly. Behind him was empty, and most of the malice had been weakened. There was a clear boundary between the two. All the power that came pouring over seemed to have been blocked by his own power. Zhang Yan could see that the Weili was constantly expanding. This was not only in terms of power, but also in the divine will. In other words, as long as you saw it, there was no way to escape except to resist. In the end, even cultivators would not be able to sense this power, let alone go up to stop it. They would only be drowned by it. In reality, once this power was displayed, it would lead to the end. The reason why he could still see it was because the Taoist was blocking it. Therefore, this was only the power after it had been suppressed. The Weili possessed by that existence was far more tyrannical than expected. In order to deal with this force, Zhang Yan immediately turned his divine will. Boundless Weili was produced and directly attached to Bushutian. The malicious attack seemed to have hit a solid barrier and was unable to penetrate even an inch. With his back facing him, the Taoist said, "I'll leave this place to you." As soon as he said this, the darkness that swallowed everything was no longer obstructed. In an instant, it passed through all obstructions and surged forward. Zhang Yan could guess what he wanted to do. Just now, this person had torn apart the obstruction for him. Clearly, he had lost some opportunities in the battle. If he wanted to continue fighting, he would need a chance to adjust his breathing, and the gap left here would be filled by him. Only by holding on to this power would he be able to prevent the worlds from being harmed. However, this was also what he wanted. Only then would he be able to see enough things to make up for what he lacked. With a wave of his sleeve and a stroke of his finger, a torrential river was drawn out. Its momentum was endless, and it was completely formed by the Patriarch's mighty power. All the appearances were reflected by his mind, or it could be said that it was a reversal of each other's understanding of their minds. The river surged and directly collided with the malice. The tides surged and the waves behind pushed against the waves in front. It actually completely stopped the malice, making it unable to invade any further. At the same time, many things invaded his mind. This was like seeing the Patriarch's Weili River for the first time. The magic powers collided and fused, allowing him to see the mysteries of the other. At the same time, the other also saw many things. However, his avatar was formed from Bushutian's creation Weili and the Patriarch's Weili, so the other couldn't see him directly. At this time, a deep and hollow voice came, "Tai Ming." Zhang Yan instantly sensed that a pair of eyes had suddenly turned towards him from the depths of the void. If the frightening malice from before had only affected him, then most of it had been caught by the Taoist. But now, all of it had landed on him. He had faced it twice before, so he had nothing to fear now. From the beginning, his goal was to help the Taoist share some of the pressure. If the Taoist only focused on him, that would be the best. Even if this avatar was destroyed, he could use this opportunity to see more. The rushing river continued to wear down the Taoist. Its power didn't decrease by much, but it was moving away from him. After all, this wasn't his own power, and it wasn't at the same level. The other couldn't directly kill the whaley, but it could disrupt his control so that it didn't belong to him. If this continued, it wouldn't be long before he completely lost control of the river. This situation was within his expectations. Just now, he had already achieved his goal. Moreover, he wasn't alone here. The Taoist had already adjusted himself. His aura grew, and the Fa power that had been suppressed surged again, becoming extremely eye-catching. Zhang Yan was clearly aware in his heart that even though he had managed to catch his breath, it would not be able to change the final outcome of this battle. Fortunately, this had undoubtedly prolonged the battle. Even if he was still defeated, he would have more opportunities. It wasn't difficult for the Taoist to sense that he couldn't hold on for long. He immediately pointed with his finger, and an endless stream of sword light swept across the void. It instantly cut apart the malicious and dark force. However, Zhang Yan did not stop because of this. Now that this body had not truly dissipated, he could still do some more tests. Under the control of his will, long river surging waves rushed down the hole created by the sword light, searching for the source of the malice. However, halfway there, it encountered a great resistance. Then, the open doors suddenly closed, and all senses were lost. His eyes flashed. It was a pity that he couldn't go there. Fortunately, he had done what he needed to do. Now, he just needed to wait until this avatar was finished. With him joining the battle, he helped the Taoist bear a lot of the burden. The battle was actually on the same level for a while. However, this was only temporary. When he retreated, everything would return to normal. After fighting for an unknown amount of time, Zhang Yan felt that the patriarch's whaley had become extremely weak. Knowing that the final moment had arrived, he raised his sleeve and bowed to the Taoist. "If I succeed, I will naturally come back to help you." As soon as he finished speaking, his entire clone exploded into pieces, and even the creation energy collapsed along with it. At the same time, Zhang Yan's consciousness returned to his original body. Using Bushutian as a barrier, he blocked the malicious intent of the divine will outside. However, this was only suppression and couldn't be eliminated. The next time he went out, it would appear again. This was the price he had to pay for facing that existence. Without the patriarch's whaley, he wouldn't go out easily. Once his cultivation reached a certain level, he would naturally be able to resolve it. Just now, in the fight, he had gained a lot. As long as he absorbed all of it, it wouldn't be difficult to make up for the last weakness. However, many of what he saw was fake or even distorted. Just like after he passed the enlightenment stage, what others saw from him wasn't completely real, and he would have to distinguish it himself. But even if it was fake, it must have been derived from the real Xian theory. Otherwise, it wouldn't be enough to make people believe it. After removing the false and retaining the true, he would be able to obtain what he wanted. He focused his mind and entered a meditative state. He deduced and asked himself. He saw the unknown and verified the mysteries of what he saw with the great Tao that Bushutian had reflected into his body. After a long time, the understanding was completely established. At this moment, even though he hadn't entered the second realm, he knew everything in advance. It was as if he had experienced it once before. The construction of understanding was divided into seeing and not seeing. If one's body was clear, then it was seeing and not seeing. He believed that the method here was to first use one's own seeing to build enlightenment. Once he reached that realm, he would turn around and solve his own not seeing. This was just like how people who sought help from outside had passed the enlightenment stage. They would be dealt with after they had succeeded. However, in this way, on the surface, it seemed like there would never be a day when the cultivation method would be completed. This was because one was always on the path of success and had never truly reached it. But in reality, this was the most correct path. Even if it wasn't, he had a clear feeling that it was naturally correct. Even if it wasn't the case for others, it was the correct path for him. After understanding all of this, he already knew what he should do. He retreated his mind and separated himself from the various methods. His entire being seemed to retreat into the void. However, because his divine will was still connected to Bushutian, he wouldn't truly enter it. Only here could he see the gap between the realms. If there wasn't the help of the creation Whaley, then he would need to entrust a part of his own Whaley to either a creation fragment or a creation treasure. At the very least, he would need help from someone of the same generation. If there weren't any of these, then he could only rely on his clone. This was also the most dangerous method. Fortunately, he was the master of several creation lands, so he didn't have to worry about this. In an instant, he felt that he had already retreated to the darkness, and he was only a step away from truly entering silence. At this moment, an endless light rose within his divine will, as if he had seen the heart of the land of creation. He knew that this was the result he was seeking, so he immediately let go of the restraint in his mind and allowed the light to shine into his body. Suddenly, the darkness that was already close to him retreated far away as if it was deliberately avoiding him. He slowly opened his eyes. A dim light flickered in his eyes, and it took a while for him to calm down. He looked up at the void and waved his sleeves. Amidst the surging Xian Qi, a voice said, "The heart that avoids all tribulations is in front, the void is always purified, the past and the future are all down, the spirit of the world overflows the sky." Chapter 2061. After Zhang Yan's cultivation had entered the second realm, he immediately sensed it carefully. Because this realm was based on his own knowledge, he already knew all the changes before he entered this realm. The only difference was that he couldn't use it at that time. If a cultivator entered the spirit refinement realm, it could be said that, "All emptiness sees me, I see all emptiness," then after passing the enlightenment pass, the cultivator pursued, I see emptiness." The most impressive ability here was the ability to avoid the spiritual energy of the same generation and return to where it came from. That day when he wanted to pass the enlightenment pass, the faceless Taoist came out to stop him. He had never understood how this person could escape into the void, or how he could bypass his magic power, and then directly appear in front of him. After building this realm of knowledge and reconciling, not seeing, and seeing, he understood the real truth here. It was this method that allowed him to avoid his spiritual energy. Fortunately, that person was only an avatar at that time and couldn't use his full strength. Otherwise, it wouldn't be so easy for him to block it. Now, if he met that person again, he could use the same method to respond and wouldn't fall into such a predicament again. Apart from this, the second realm of the spirit refinement realm was different from any other realm. It wasn't like you could solve the problem once and for all with this level of cultivation. You still needed to constantly unravel the unknown. In fact, as long as a cultivator didn't understand the path of cultivation, there would always be unknown things. The higher one's cultivation, the more it was like this. This way, one would always be solving problems and on the path of pursuing the path of cultivation. Based on this, it seemed impossible to go any further. He also didn't know what to do to reach the third realm that might exist. However, his cultivation was based on the ancestral master's technique and the traces of that existence's spiritual energy. He also used the creation Whaley to verify each other. Just now, because every cultivator's path was different, not everyone was like him. Looking at it this way, it would be best if he could find another cultivator who reached the second realm to communicate with. Unfortunately, as far as the eye could see, the only person that could be found in the vast void was probably that Taoist. Those who had reached the second stage were all able to conceal themselves, isolating themselves from everything. This meant that if he cultivated, he could avoid anyone he didn't want to see and that person wouldn't be able to interfere with what he was doing. If this were to continue, then all traces of him would fade away, and he would completely disappear from the world. Only when he willed it would he be able to appear once more. From the looks of it, those who have reached this realm, even if they don't have a place of fortune, they can use this method to avoid being harmed by that existence. This might also explain why there are so few cultivators who have reached the second gate in the void silence. Zhang Yan thought about it. If that person really couldn't appear, then it was fine. If that person really couldn't appear, then it would be fine. But if that person thought he could avoid that existence's attack, he was just deceiving himself. That existence's spiritual energy was constantly increasing. If no one came out to stop it, it would devour everything. Sooner or later, it would rise to a level where no one could hide. It was impossible to stay out of it. Moreover, even if that person could really avoid it, when that time comes, he would be the only one left. Everything in the outside world, including those who walked the same path as him, wouldn't exist. What was the difference between that and entering eternal silence? Of course, it was also possible that some people couldn't find the place of fortune and could only hide and wait for an opportunity. Or they might be tied down by something and couldn't appear. If it was the latter, then it would be fine. But if it was the former, then this person would just sit and watch the Taoist fight alone without daring to come out. That was undoubtedly a short-sighted move. Zhang Yan raised his head and looked into the void. Now that the spiritual energy of both sides was fluctuating, it meant that the battle was very intense. It was obvious that after receiving his help, the Taoist had slightly turned the tables. It seemed like he could hold on for a long time. Before he officially went out to help, he still had time to make some arrangements. Thinking about this, he couldn't help but think about the sword-shaped item that the Taoist left behind. In the past, he couldn't come into contact with it before he cultivated. Now that he had broken through the barrier, he could take a look at it. At that moment, his spirit turned and entered an unknown place. However, when he looked at it now, he realized that the sword-shaped item was different from before. Instead, it was an extremely long sword gleam that stretched horizontally in front of him. When he tried to sense it, he realized that it was formed by countless tiny sword gleams. They shuttled back and forth and intertwined with each other. No matter how he looked at the details, the image that was reflected was the same. At the same time, countless wonderful theories flowed into his spirit along with the sword gleams. He understood that the Taoist was communicating with him about the Tao. Through these things that appeared, the Taoist was explaining the principles of his sword and even the Tao of the sword to him. Although he was skilled in flying swords, he only saw it as a method to protect himself and didn't focus on it. On the other hand, the Taoist was obviously only using the sword and had deduced this Tao to an extremely high level. At this moment, when he looked at it attentively, he sighed with emotion and felt that he had gained something. However, everyone's Tao path was different, and it was almost the exact opposite. So, he wouldn't imitate the Taoist because of this. Now, he was standing at the same height as the Taoist and could treat him as an equal. After observing for a while, he naturally came to a conclusion in his heart. He pondered for a moment before he similarly stretched out his hand and slashed. A ray of sword light descended as well. In just an instant, countless rays of sword light responded, and he instantly gained something. After this discussion, he noticed that although he could see a lot, the Taoist didn't reveal the source of the Taoist's Tao at all. He understood that this couldn't be casually revealed. However, he could use this as a reference to verify himself. Other than the Taoist's Tao, there were many tricks and methods. One of them was a method to refine the sword, and it attracted his attention. After he became a spirit refinement cultivator, he rarely used the flying sword. That was because no matter how great the Qinghong sword pill was, it was refined in the present world, so it was slightly weaker when used in a confrontation with a spirit refinement cultivator. Perhaps if he used his own qi to activate it, he would be able to show off for a while. However, the amount of help he could bring would not be as great as before. Against those who were weaker than him, it was fine. However, against that existence, it would probably be destroyed in an instant. He could use the creation fragment to refine a sword pill, but he could feel that it wasn't what he needed. It might not even be as easy to use as the Qinghong sword pill. However, in this method, it paid particular attention to how to use the land of creation to nurture and refine the flying sword. The mystery of this method was that the cultivator used his own consciousness to visualize the land of creation. It was best if there had never been a treasure of creation born in the land. Then, he would pour his consciousness into the land at all times. The essence of this was to divert the treasure of creation that was supposed to be born in the direction of the sword pill. The treasure of creation was completely nurtured by the world itself, but it could also be guided and interfered with. This was something he had never seen before, so there were naturally many tricks to it. He looked at it and was amazed. However, it required the full potential of the land of creation to refine it. If it was done wrongly, what was produced in the end would only be useless. He thought about it. This was actually very difficult. Although he had Busu Tian, and every calendar would nurture a treasure of creation, it was still too far away to wait until the next calendar. Now that he was the master of Busu Tian, if he had enough cultivation, he could try to take it from the future. However, this would be nailing the future variables, and under the premise that the various forces had not been cleaned up, it was not very suitable. Thus, he decided to put this matter aside for the time being. He had to sort out the matters in front of him first. With this thought, he retreated from the will of the spirit and wondered if he should immediately go to help that Taoist. This matter definitely could not be delayed for too long, but he still needed to make some preparations before taking action. This was because if he could not suppress or even repel that existence this time, this battle would definitely be entangled. At that time, he might not be able to retreat as he wished. However, in order to prevent any accidents from happening to Busu Tian, he had to bring everyone with him. The 3 people suppressed inside also needed to be dealt with appropriately. Thus, this matter needed to be carefully planned. After thinking about it, he immediately went to the meeting hall and ordered the formation spirit to send out a talisman to summon everyone to discuss. Not long after, with a burst of spiritual light, everyone arrived in the hall. Even Chen Shu sent a clone here. After the 2 sides finished greeting each other, they took their seats. Zhang Yan said, "I have invited everyone here today because I has already entered the 2nd stage. It is time for me to go out and help that fellow Taoist." Everyone's hearts trembled. They were surprised that Zhang Yan's cultivation had improved greatly, but they were also worried about the upcoming confrontation with that existence. Even though they knew that they would not be able to escape if they did not take the initiative to attack, they still could not help but feel anxious when facing that existence. Taoist Zhang Yuan's expression was solemn as he asked, "When does fellow Taoist plan to take action?" Zhang Yan said, "This matter is very important. I think fellow Taoists need to make sufficient preparations, so I do not plan to take action immediately." Hearing this, everyone couldn't help but feel slightly relieved. At this time, Zhang Yan said, "However, if I and everyone else go out to help that fellow Taoist, then there will be no one to defend Busu Tian. What do you think we should do with Xianche, Towering Sky, Ren Du, and the others?" Taoist Xinchang said, "I believe that fellow Taoist has personally captured these people, so you should also make the decision here." Taoist Qingxing said, "I have a question here. I wonder if fellow Taoist can send them into eternal silence right now." Zhang Yan looked at him and nodded slightly. Everyone was slightly startled. Since Zhang Yan had the means to suppress the 3 of them into eternal silence, it was likely that it wouldn't be difficult for him to deal with them. Even though they knew that Zhang Yan wouldn't do that, and there was no need for him to do so before that existence was defeated, there was still an additional trace of fear in their eyes when they looked at him. Qing Sheng's expression turned cold as he said, "Then fellow Taoist, why don't you take care of these people? That way, when we go out to fight, our path of retreat will be secure." Chapter 2062. When Zhang Yan heard Taoist Qing Sheng's words, he didn't comment on it. He had asked the others when he came down, and they all seemed to listen to his arrangements, so they didn't have any opinion on it. Thus, he said, "I think about it, this person has some ability after all. It's just that it's too much of a waste to suppress him into eternal silence like this. If you're willing to lend a hand, I can make them follow me into eternal silence." A long time ago, he did have the intention to get rid of Tsang Xiao, Ren Du, and the others, so as to completely eliminate any future troubles. But now that he thought about it, after he entered the second stage, these few people were no longer a threat to him, so he wasn't afraid of them stirring up any trouble. It was best to make use of them to deal with that existence. However, if he didn't say anything about this matter and directly brought out these few people, it would make everyone suspicious, which wouldn't be beneficial to the battle. Now that he mentioned it, everyone would have an idea of what to do. As expected, after he said that, other than Taoist Qing Sheng who didn't say anything, everyone else agreed. After all, it was always good to have more people to share the pressure. As for Zhang Yan being able to suppress these few people, they weren't worried. With his mana, they believed that it wouldn't be hard for him to deal with them. Zhang Yan said, "This battle is of great importance. If anyone has any suggestions, please speak up." Daoist Shinchang thought for a while and said cautiously, "Fellow Daoists' cultivation has improved greatly, so I think you're not afraid of that existence anymore. It's just that our mana is far from enough. If we go there, I'm afraid it'll be hard for us to resist. I wonder if fellow Daoist has any way to help me." What he said was what everyone was thinking. Currently, all of their clones were fighting outside, so they could feel how powerful that existence was. All of them thought that if they were to rely on their own strength, they wouldn't be able to pose any threat to that existence. Instead, they might not be able to protect themselves. Quan Dao and Quan Dao knew this very well. When they tried to escape into Busu Heaven to seek protection, they were captured by that existence. They could still remember that there was no way for them to get rid of the malicious intent. They could only watch helplessly as they were trapped. If it wasn't for Zhang Yan coming to rescue them, they would have been forced into eternal silence. They did not want to relive that experience again. Wan Fang cupped his hands and said, "That existence's arcane energy is extremely powerful. Back then, Dao friend Bing Kong and I tried to resist it, but it was useless. We are not afraid of battle, but we are afraid that we will become a burden instead." Zhang Yan looked at the crowd and said, "You don't have to worry about this. If you are in the void, I will naturally use my powers to protect you. Even if you are in danger, I will send you back to the place of creation in time so that you won't be in danger." Actually, even if everyone was trapped by that existence's mana, they would be fine for a while. He could still be like the Taoist and rescue them. One should know that with his current cultivation level, there wasn't an absolute gap between him and that existence. It was just that in the future, it was uncertain. Therefore, now was the time to attack. Everyone was slightly relieved. The reason why they were afraid of that existence was because they were afraid of being forced into eternal silence. Now that there was a way to resolve this matter, the threat was greatly reduced. Zhang Yan gave a few more instructions and said, "Everyone can go back and prepare first. When the time is right, I will naturally summon everyone to attack that person." After everyone bowed, they all left. At this moment, Zhang Yan's gaze shifted and saw that Qin Shu had not left. He asked, "Dao friend, do you have something to say?" Qin Shu bowed and said, "Dao friend, just now, you said that I would protect you. However, I am not at your place of creation. When the time comes, what should I do?" She was different from the rest. She did not stay in the four regions of creation. At the same time, she was the master of a place of creation. When the time came, she could only rely on herself. With many fellow Taoists protecting her and Zhang Yan in front of her, it was not difficult for her to return to her original place. However, her hiding place would undoubtedly be exposed. Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Dao friend, you don't have to worry. When the time comes, I can give you a talisman. When the time comes, it can protect you and retreat to Bushu Heaven. This way, you won't have to worry." Qin Shu was finally relieved. She bowed and thanked him. "Thank you, Dao friend." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. After she left, he came to the place where Xian Che and the others were suppressed. With a wave of his sleeve, he moved the Wei away. Towering Sky and Ren felt their bodies lighten. All the pressure was gone. They were stunned. Then, they raised their heads and looked up. They saw Zhang Yan standing there with his sleeves behind his back. His body was shrouded in light and his aura was majestic. The two of them were bewildered. They did not know what he wanted to do. It was difficult for them to see Zhang Yan's current cultivation. However, it was not difficult for them to sense that his aura was deeper than before. However, it seemed to be there but not there. It gave them a feeling of fear. Taoist Xian Che seemed to have guessed something. He remained silent. Zhang Yan looked down and said, I have already decided to go out and fight that person. Before that, I will not keep you here. Taoist Xian Che frowned. He raised his head and said, Don't forget what you promised me. Zhang Yan nodded and said, I have a promise with you. I will not break it. When the time comes, you will also need to go to the void with I, Taoist Towering Sky said in a deep voice, then how are you going to deal with the two of us? Zhang Yan said seriously, as long as the two of you are willing to go with I to suppress that person, I can bring the two of you with me. Rendu sneered instead and said, but once we arrive in silence, wouldn't we be forced into eternal silence if you stand by idly and do nothing? Zhang Yan said indifferently, if I want to do this, there is no need for me to do so. I only need to expel the two of you from this place. Now that I have come to discuss with you, it is because I value your abilities. He looked at the three of them and said, even though we were enemies in the past, how can we be compared to the threat of that person? In his opinion, it was a complete waste to use these three people as bait. In fact, even if these people were not on his side, they would still fight against that existence for the sake of their own survival, even if he did not push them from the back. The only difference was whether they were passive or active. Therefore, keeping them alive would be more useful. Rendu thought for a moment and said abruptly, then if we repel that person this time, would you be able to let us go out? Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, if you can really do it, you will have done a good deed. I can promise to let you go. However, if you want to live under I's rule, you must abide by I's rules. If you can't defeat that person, I can set an appointment with you. Once you are there, I will release you. Taoist Skirich thought for a while. Zhang Yan should have some confidence in suppressing that person. It was better for him to go with him than to be suppressed here. Moreover, he could see that if he did not agree, Zhang Yan might try to deal with him. So, he asked, when will we act? Zhang Yan said, in the next few days. The two of you can make some preparations here. After a pause, he said, this battle is not for I, but for your own. If that person destroys everything, he will not let you go so easily. With that, his figure flickered and disappeared. Taoist Skirich noticed that the creation Whaley was no longer suppressing them. However, he felt that it was still difficult to go outside. There was always a layer of obstruction there. He couldn't help but be shocked by Zhang Yan's control over Bushutian's Whaley. Rendu said coldly, what preparation? Our treasures and creation fragments have all been taken by that person. What do we have to fight against that person? Taoist Skirich shook his head and said, it doesn't matter if we have treasures to protect ourselves when facing that person. It is enough as long as he fulfills his promise. He looked at the silent Taoist Xian Che and said, fellow Taoist, when did he make the promise with you? Taoist Xian Che glanced at the two of them. He did have the intention to use them earlier, but now that his plan had failed, he was no longer in the mood to deal with them. He said indifferently, the road ahead is complicated. It is hard to know what to do. We should take care of ourselves. After he finished speaking, he ignored the two of them and sat there, silently circulating his cultivation fruit. Rendu transmitted a message with his divine intent, Xian Che is hiding something. Taoist Skirich pondered for a moment and said, let's ignore him for now. We'll just keep an eye on him when we get out of the silence. Zhang Yan returned to Qinghuan Palace and casually refined another 2 treasures, then put them away in his sleeves. However, before he officially started, he still had one more thing to do. He raised his hand and took out the broken mask he obtained from the faceless Taoist. He carefully sensed it. At that time, due to the limitations of his cultivation, he could only trace the karma. Now, It wasn't difficult for him to capture that weak wisp of aura. He followed its direction and his gaze fell on the mirror-like lake. Previously, after he defeated the faceless Taoist, he deliberately looked at this place. All of the karmic connections here were severed, and he thought that this was a place that his fellow Taoists used to hide themselves. At this moment, when he looked at it again, he saw something different from before. Not only that, that wisp of chi activity and a few weak traces of mana resonated with each other. Looking at it, he found that they were broken masks that floated in different worlds, and they moved in and out with the birth and death of the world. If there was no accident, they should all be the work of the same person. Because there was magic power attached to them, it was possible that as long as it sensed something happening, it would evolve into a magic power doppelganger. He pondered for a moment. According to what the faceless Taoist said that day, the faceless Taoist stopped him from going to the Jiezhen Pass in order to prevent that existence from entering the world. Now that that existence had appeared, it seemed that there was no need for that existence to stop him again. However, this matter couldn't be viewed in such a simple way. Due to the lack of more clues, it was impossible to see what the person was thinking. He only knew that the person had shown considerable hostility towards him, and even tried to obstruct his path. Therefore, as long as that person still had the ability to interfere with him, he couldn't ignore it. This kind of threat had to be removed in advance, so that it wouldn't hinder him in the future. Thinking of this, he immediately willed another Whaley avatar to be born in the silence, and it followed the weak wisp of aura to search for the broken masks. Chapter 2063. Although Zhang Yan's Whaley incarnation was walking in the void, it was not hindered in the slightest. This was because it was easy for a cultivator at the second tier of spirit cultivation to conceal his own magic power, and he could also find the source of the opponent's magic power. Therefore, it was easy for him to avoid the fluctuations of the existence's magic power, and directly fell to the target. Even if the faceless Taoist's cultivation was not as good as the current Taoist with the sword, his realm was at least comparable. Now was obviously a good time to suppress that existence. His magic power was here, but he did not show up. No matter what the reason was, he was not on the same side as him. In a flash, he came to the place where the magic power fluctuations were. Looking around, he saw a mask with a missing corner floating in the void. After a glance, when he was about to take it, the mask seemed to sense something. It suddenly turned into an illusory figure. It was the faceless Taoist that he met last time. The person did not seem to expect that Zhang Yan would find his way here. He said in a deep voice, "What are you doing here? Are you still not willing to give up after drawing that existence out?" Zhang Yan looked at him and said, "Now I want to lead the people to crusade against that existence. Looking at your behavior, you must have been hostile to that existence before. So what do you plan to do now?" The faceless Taoist said in a deep voice, "It is impossible to suppress and expel that existence. It can only delay the manifestation, but you did not listen to me. You went to the Jiezhen Pass and finally drew it out. Now it is too late to remedy it. As long as this existence starts to devour everything, it will be unstoppable. If you think you can defeat it with your current cultivation, it is just wishful thinking." Zhang Yan said indifferently, "What I did, even if I can't suppress it, I can delay its invasion of everything. It is better than someone who does not even dare to stop it." Now he also had a rough idea of the existence's origin. If this was really the case, it was indeed difficult to suppress it. But as he said, he could try to delay the battle and prevent it from devouring everything, but not let its strength expand. Moreover, his own cultivation could also be improved. Now that he had the means to stop it, who could say that he could not suppress it in the future? Faceless Taoist, however, did not agree and said, "The results are still the same, all meaningless actions." Zhang Yan said coldly, "Whether it's meaningful or not, it's not up to you to judge. Instead, it's up to the fellow Taoist in the void who dares to stand out and face that person. When that person really overturns everything, are you going to wait for death? Or could it be that you have some sort of countermeasure, but you're unwilling to use it until the very last moment?" Faceless Taoist fell silent. It was unknown whether it was because he only had a doppelganger here and didn't know about this, or he simply didn't want to make it clear. Zhang Yan didn't pursue the matter and directly said, "Since you are not willing to fight with me, then I can only ask you to leave this place." At this point, he raised his sleeve and pointed a finger at the person. Faceless Taoist immediately responded. Layers of magic power spread out from his body, trying to repel the external force. At the same time, his body became extremely faint, as if he was going to hide. However, the next moment, his figure stiffened, and cracks appeared on his body. Then, he collapsed in an instant, leaving only the mask there. Last time, it took Zhang Yan a lot of effort to deal with this person, and he even used the Tai golden bead. Just now, he won in the end. But this time, the magic power went straight to the person's root, and how could a sustenance celestial device withstand it? Once it was broken, the magic power stored in it could not be preserved. At this time, he felt that something had appeared in his mind. Although the faceless Taoist's true body was not here, because of the fusion of magic power during the confrontation, he also saw some Xian principle changes, which could also be used to make up for the unknown that he had not seen. He rolled up his sleeve and kept the broken mask, then went to another place where the magic power stopped. Just now, there was also a doppelganger on the mask. After killing it with a similar method, he also kept this mask, and then rushed to the next place. After destroying 4 places in succession, he appeared in front of the last mask. However, this thing seemed to be aware of the approaching danger, so in a flash, it fled somewhere. Zhang Yan's gaze swept over and saw that it was cast towards the mirror lake. He naturally wouldn't allow it to be taken off so easily. The reason he came here was to try his best to get rid of any external forces that could interfere with his cultivation. Even if he missed one, it wouldn't be considered complete. With a thought, the mask froze in an instant. The mana on it dissipated before it could manifest. Then, it was sucked over by him and put into his sleeve. At this time, he turned to look at the mirror lake. Previously, he also noticed that no matter where he went, as long as he followed the weak magic power, he would always be able to see this place in a glance. This meant that the faceless Taoist's magic power was related to this place, and this should also be a place of refuge. Perhaps this person was hiding there at the moment. So after destroying these masks, would the person send out the same thing from the inner room? He thought that the possibility was extremely low. These masks had all been placed outside before the calamity of leaving the sky. The reason why the original owner did this was because he was afraid of that existence. He did not dare to show himself, so he could only use a clone to do things in his place. Therefore, if this person had the guts to come out, it would be a good thing. That existence would not care about the conflict between them. As long as it was a cultivator that appeared in the silence, it would be a target for that existence. However, now was not the time to delve deeper into this place. Since these things that could hinder him were no longer here, it was time to gather strength to deal with that existence. He turned around, and his figure disappeared into the nothingness. In Busu Tian, Chen Shu was at Taoist Xinchang's place, seeking advice on cultivation. It was also luck. Recently, everyone had accidentally found a treasure embryo. Chen Shu refined it into her body, and her cultivation had increased a lot. Although she did not have the ability to find treasure embryos like Boy Xinchang, she was not like the latter, who would be extremely sleepy when refining the treasure embryo. She was still no different from usual. However, Chen Shu was still not satisfied. She said, "Cultivation can be improved by relying on the treasure embryo, but I always feel that my state of mind is unstable. It is not good for battle. Do you have any advice for me?" Taoist Xinchang pondered for a while. He raised his hand, and 2 cups of spiritual tea appeared in front of him. He said, "Why don't you have a drink?" Chen Shu glanced at it and picked it up. Taoist Xinchang then said, "Why don't you judge it with your body and then feel it with your heart?" Chen Shu was startled, and she nodded lightly. Then, she changed her mind and drank it. She felt refreshed all over her body. She was different from before, and she suddenly thought of something. Taoist Xinchang said, you asked me about the state of mind. Do you have a way that might be useful? Chen Shu said with a serious expression, what is it? Taoist Xinchang said, we treasure spirits have never experienced the trials of the path of Tao. Fellow Taoist, you can seal off your own memories and enter the world to be reincarnated. After wandering the world once, you will naturally gain something. Chen Shu thought about it and was puzzled. She said, even if I travel the world, it is just a fleeting shadow to me. What is the use of it? Deity refinement cultivators were beyond the world. The changes in the world were endless, and to them, it was just an illusion. As long as you have this understanding, no matter how much you experience in the world, you might not be able to understand anything when you return. Taoist Xinchang smiled, did you drink that cup of tea just now, my friend? Chen Shu recalled the feeling of just now, and she seemed to have understood something. Taoist Xinchang continued, as long as you see yourself as a human, then you are a human. Sometimes, you will have a different kind of glory when you lower your status. He wanted Chen Shu to completely immerse herself in the world, and no longer see herself as an almighty that had transcended the world. There was indeed a barrier of the heart that was blocking her way, but if she could not even get past it, how could she talk about subduing her state of mind? Chen Shu thought about it for a long time, and said, I am willing to give it a try, but where should I go when I am in the current world? Taoist Xinchang said, fellow Taoist Xianyuan could call us to go to the void at any time. This place is the communication point between the current world and the land of creation, and it is not a good place to go. Fellow Taoist can go to the past world, and you will only need to turn back in an instant. On the other side, Taoist Qing Sheng was currently gathered with Quan Dao, and they were also discussing how to deal with that existence. Quan Dao had a direct encounter with that existence, and Taoist Qing Sheng thought that it was very important. If others were to say that they had no choice but to fight with that existence because of Zhang Yan's urging, he really wanted to expel or even suppress that existence. It could be said that other than Zhang Yan, he was the most proactive person in this matter. Therefore, he had to figure out the methods of that existence. Even if it was just a superficial part of it, it was better than knowing nothing at all. Wan Fang said with lingering fear, that existence's mana seems to have an innate ability to devour. When we went forward with our mana, we could not stop it at all. Instead, we were devoured by it. Bing Kong said, unfortunately, we did not notice it at first, and our senses were distorted by it. This is the scariest part. If it was not for the fact that we have some foundation, we would not have been able to last until fellow Taoists came to rescue us. Taoist Qing Sheng's expression was solemn. No matter what kind of situation it was extremely difficult to deal with it, especially the latter. Even their senses were distorted, so they could not accurately judge the situation. However, they did not know how far they could go. Otherwise, even though they had more people, they did not have much of an advantage. However, on second thought, not long ago, Zhang Yan's doppelganger seemed to have gone out to fight with that existence, so he should be clear about the situation here. Presumably, he would be well prepared, so there was no need to think too much about this, as long as he was careful. After thinking about it, he said, this time, fellow Taoist Xianyuan and the fellow Taoist with the sword will share most of the pressure. I'm afraid what we need to do is to suppress and reduce that existence's mana as much as possible. When that time comes, I will need the full support of the two of you. If we can see the profound principles of the great Tao from that existence and improve our cultivation, I will definitely repay you in the future. Quan Dao nodded in agreement. At this moment, a spiritual talisman suddenly flew over. Taoist Qing Sheng took it and saw it. He stood up and said, fellow Taoist Xianyuan has summoned us, it seems like it is time to go out and fight that existence. Chapter 2064. Taoist Qing Sheng and Quan Dao did not dare to delay. With a change of heart, they arrived at the main hall in an instant. After a while, Taoist Xinchang, Boy Xinchang, Taoist Zhang Yuan, Chen Shu, and the others also arrived. After greeting each other, Taoist Qing Sheng shifted his gaze and looked at Chen Shu's face. The latter's spirit and qi were slightly different from before. It seemed to have undergone a certain degree of transformation. This was not something that could be achieved by swallowing a precious fetus. It should be a breakthrough in the state of mind. However, he only took a glance and no longer looked at her. No matter what she did was only seeking external help. In his opinion, it was a wrong path. Only seeking oneself was the right path, and all those who sought him would be his future opponents. When his cultivation increased, he would find a way to eliminate them. After waiting for about 10 breaths, everyone suddenly felt their chi wavering as if they were in the midst of a turbulent chi wave. They quickly calmed their minds. Then, on the high platform, a vast Xian Qi surged out of nowhere, and a young Taoist wearing a black robe appeared there. When everyone saw him, they hurriedly greeted him. Zhang Yan nodded slightly. After returning the greeting, he waved his sleeve, and his Weili spread out to remove a certain restriction in Busushan. After a while, 3 Weili emerged from an unknown place. The 3 of them, Shen Xiao, Ren Du, and Xian Che, had already been moved to the main hall. At that moment, the 3 of them looked calm, and it was impossible to tell that they had been imprisoned. Taoist Qing Sheng sneered and no longer paid attention to them. Shen Chang, Zhang Yuan, and the others lowered their eyes and did not look at them at all. Chen Shu, on the other hand, looked at them curiously. She joined late and had never dealt with the 3 of them. She only heard that the 3 of them had been suppressed by Zhang Yan. However, at that moment, she realized that none of them were weaker than her, and even Taoist Shen Xiao was far above her. Subconsciously, she looked at Zhang Yan again, and her heart was filled with even more respect. Zhang Yan stood on the stage and looked down. He said slowly, "Ever since that existence appeared, he has been seizing everything and swallowing the essence of creation. He is indeed a great enemy of our generation. If we retreat now and don't think of ways to stop him, when everything is destroyed, there will be nowhere to hide. This time, we should take advantage of the fact that he hasn't finished his work and go out with everyone to attack him." Everyone knew that this matter had to be carried out, so they all responded, "We are willing to follow you." In reality, everyone had doubts in their hearts, but they all knew that Zhang Yan's decision was correct. Regardless of whether it was in the long run or in the short run, it was the most advantageous choice. At this moment, Zhang Yan directed with his mind, and a doppelganger walked out. In the blink of an eye, it landed in the Qinghuan Palace and sat down. This was the doppelganger that he was going to leave behind after he left. Bu Shutian was undoubtedly the most important. Everyone relied on this place for protection. Even if they failed to achieve their goal this time, as long as this place was still there, there was still a way out. However, if he left as the master, someone might take advantage of the gap and invade, so he had to make arrangements in advance. This was not to guard against that existence. Although he was not in Bushutian, he could still use the Weili here, so it was almost impossible to invade from the outside. However, he had to pay attention to the strange power that existed in Bushutian. These strange powers could not be completely eliminated, because if that existence was delayed, he would not have the time to care about other places. So, if someone came out to attack Bushutian at this time, although they would not be able to take this place away, it would be difficult for him to send people back safely if there was internal chaos. Moreover, Bushutian was implicated in the present world, and there were also his fellow masters and disciples. They would not be able to resist the invasion of the mighty figures of the spirit refinement realm. In order to prevent such a situation from happening, besides this doppelganger, he also left behind the 2 jade pendants. At a critical moment, he could use the Patriarch's Weili to help. However, if there was an external enemy who activated the strange power, he did not expect to be able to calm it down. As long as he could hinder it a little, he could withdraw in time to deal with the internal problems. Although these things might not really happen, it was always good to be prepared. He solemnly explained some important matters to everyone, then looked up at the void silence. His aura suddenly rose, as if there was no end to it. As his robe fluttered, the 5-colored brilliance behind him rotated, and then he took a step out of Bushutian. Taoist Qing Sheng did not hesitate and immediately followed. Taoist Quan Dao and Taoist Qing Sheng followed closely behind. Taoist Chang Dao and the others were not slow either, and they almost followed at the same time. As soon as Zhang Yan entered the void silence, he felt a boundless malice shrouding him, and the other person's gaze also stared at him. This was different from the previous time when he only sent his doppelganger here. Now, he was facing that person directly. With a single thought, the Xian Qi around him suddenly surged and filled the void silence, blocking all the magic power fluctuations that came over. At the same time, behind him, streams of Wei broke through the world and appeared in the void silence one after another. More than 10 mighty figures of the spirit refinement realm appeared at the same time, and their aura was so shocking that even the magic power fluctuations of that existence were pushed away, and could not get close at all. The magic power between these people collided and intertwined, and countless worlds flickered like stars. Since that existence appeared, the gloomy atmosphere of the world immediately changed. Everyone was originally afraid of that existence, but that was because their strength was far inferior, and they felt that they had no chance of winning. However, they only weighed it from their own point of view. Now that everyone stood together, this gathered power was unprecedentedly grand and powerful. Not only that, Zhang Yan alone stood in front of them and blocked most of the attacks, and they immediately realized that there was still a chance of winning this battle. At this time, that existence obviously also sensed the changes here. More than 10 mighty figures of the spirit refinement realm, even if more than 90% of them were not as skilled as him, it was enough to bring a threat to him. Moreover, there was still Zhang Yan and the Taoist who were enough to restrain him. Therefore, his aura paused and he retreated. This was the first time since he appeared that he showed signs of retreating. Seeing this, everyone's confidence increased, but no one rashly attacked, because they all knew their own strength. If there was no Zhang Yan Weili to protect them, once the opponent's magic power came over, they would probably be easily suppressed into the void silence like Quan Dao and the Taoist last time. Zhang Yan knew that if he could mobilize everyone's strength, it was really possible to expel or suppress that existence this time, but the origin of this existence was still questionable. If it was as he thought, even if they could do it this time, it was still possible that not long after, but there was no need to think too much about it now. When that time came, they would think of a way to deal with it. In the depths of the void silence, the Taoist slightly tilted his head. After he received the support of Zhang Yan last time, the situation that was originally suppressed by the opponent was reversed again. At this moment, when he sensed the arrival of Zhang Yan and the others, he slightly took a step back, and then waved his big sleeve, and the sword light suddenly lengthened. Suddenly, a ray of light flashed in front of everyone, and everyone felt a great danger descending. Although they knew that it was not aimed at them, they still felt a wave of fear. As the ray of sword light descended from the silence, it was as if a celestial realm had been drawn out. However, this time, it did not split the two. Instead, it slashed directly into the darkness. It could be said that a huge gap had been torn open in the depths of that existence's mighty power. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. It seemed that the Taoist saw that strong reinforcements had arrived, so he no longer held back and turned to attack with all his strength. Not to mention that this person attacked decisively, his grasp of the opportunity could be said to be perfect, just at the moment when that existence closed in on the Weili. In that case, he should not let this person down. Immediately, with a thought, a golden light flashed, and the tiny golden beads suddenly fell in, immediately stirring up a large part of the malicious darkness. This treasure of fortune was most suitable to be used in such a place. In any case, the surroundings were surrounded by that existence's Weili, so it was suitable no matter where it fell. When Taoist Qing Sheng and the others saw this, without waiting for orders, they also attacked together, trying to continue to expand the results of the battle. As everyone fell in the Weili, the void silence that was originally filled with darkness and evil Weili also seemed to be fragmented. Zhang Yan was still cautiously looking at the depths of the void silence. Although he had disturbed that force, it did not reduce the malicious intent in the slightest. It could be seen that just now, the other party was only retreating to better attack, and he had to be wary of the other party's means. Just as he expected, when everyone's mana was surging and advancing triumphantly, they suddenly felt empty. The mana that was pushed forward landed in the void silence, and was continuously swallowed and disintegrated. At the same time, the divine wills also sensed that endless malicious intent was surging, but because they had been warned by Zhang Yan in advance, they did not panic. Zhang Yan could see that this was the other party using a huge amount of mana to disturb everyone's divine wills. Because of the difference in their realms, at this moment, except for him and that Taoist, everyone else would probably be affected. He could stop that existence's mana, but he could not expel the divine wills that were affecting everyone. However, since he dared to lead everyone out, he was naturally prepared. With a thought, he also rushed into everyone's divine wills, and twisted their senses to his side. This way, as long as everyone followed his instructions, it would be fine even if they could not sense it correctly. That existence sensed that the impact of the divine will had no effect on the crowd, so he immediately changed his method. The crowd only felt dazed for a moment before they saw Zhang Yan and the Taoist disappear. Only they were left there to face the pressure of the malicious intent. They couldn't help but be shocked. Fortunately, they still remembered Zhang Yan's instructions before they came out, so they knew what was going on. None of them panicked because of this. They all guarded themselves and no longer attacked, only waiting for the result. Seeing that everyone had disappeared, Zhang Yan squinted his eyes. He had expected this to happen. At the second tier of the spirit refinement realm, one would have the ability to hide from the Wei, and only those with similar cultivation levels could see each other. In other words, apart from him and that Taoist, no one else could see them, because they were all repelled. Fortunately, he knew that this also required a portion of mana to be used, which was equivalent to dividing the other party's strength. As long as Xin Chang, Qing Sheng, and the others could persevere, it would be beneficial for both sides. He waved his sleeves, took a step forward, and stood next to the Taoist. Looking at the evil void darkness, he said, "Now, only me and you are left." The Taoist said in a loud voice, "Fellow Taoist and I are enough."